Good evening, folks. My name is Maureen Carney. I am City Councilor from Ward 1 and Chair of the Public Safety Committee. And this is the November meeting of the Public Safety Committee, which is dedicated to a public hearing to consider the proposed ordinance number 285-53 on soliciting activities. I would like to introduce other members of the Public Safety Committee. In addition to myself, Maureen Carney, we have David Narkewicz from Ward 4, Bob Reckman from Ward 3, and David Murphy from Ward 5. In attendance, we also have, I thought I saw Councilor Marianne LaBarge in the back here, who's welcome to come up front if she'd like. And we also have the proponents of the Soliciting Activities Ordinance, and that is the Mayor's Office of Economic Development, Teri Anderson, the Police Chief, Chief Russ Sienkiewicz, and the City Solicitor, Janet Sheppard. And the way I've structured this, this meeting tonight is to ask that the proponents of the ordinance please present to the committee. And then also we've made arrangements to hear from Attorney Bill Newman from the American Civil Liberties Union, because we've had some correspondence with him. But before we start that, I would like to just let folks know there are a number of people here, and if we could keep the noise level down, it would really be helpful. Everybody will have an opportunity to share. There's a sign-in sheet up front. And what we'll do is first hear from the folks from the Economic Development, Mayor's Office of Economic Development and Police Department. Then I think we've structured it to hear from Attorney Bill Newman, and then open it up to the public for comment. Just as a matter of background, I'd like to say that this ordinance first came to us somewhere back in July, I believe.
I think so.
And this ordinance came to us in its original form with a different name. It was the same number, Ordinance 285-53, but named then Panhandling Activities. It's since been reworked, came before this committee, the Public Safety Committee, and was sent back. It was continued at that point. Since then, there have been a number of changes. Folks can access that written document on the city's website at northamptonma.gov.
There's also extra copies on the back bench.
Okay, for the latest draft of this ordinance, which is now entitled Ordinance number 285-53, Soliciting Activities. At that point, this came before the City Council, and as usual with any ordinance, it comes to the City Council and is referred out. This ordinance was referred out to the Public Safety Committee, which is this committee in its meeting tonight. Also to the Economic Development, Housing and Land Use Committee, which will meet sometime in the first couple of weeks of November. And then in December, and then also to the Ordinance Committee. So, and then depending on where it goes in each of these subcommittees, it will end up back in City Council for 2 readings, which is what is required for any ordinance that comes to the city. So let folks know there's not going to be any decision made tonight in terms of law. There's a number of steps that are required before this actually moves to the point where it would ever become law. So I appreciate everybody coming here and want to acknowledge everybody who's taken the time out of their evening to come and provide public comment. We're here to hear that tonight, and so I would just end with that and turn it over. First,
broadcast live on TV?
As I understand, we're not broadcasting live tonight, but instead we are being broadcast.
We are
Okay.
live.
Okay.
We're out there to all of Northampton.
I ran into the director over at Sam's and asked him that question. He said there's a regular Monday night meeting, so I want to say we appreciate the folks who gave up their Monday night slot to let us give this as a live presentation to the citizens of Northampton. And at that, I will ask.
Should people also not, when they come up, be careful to speak into the microphone?
I've also been told by folks at NCTV that the microphone should stay right where it is, and they don't need to move it or handle it in any way. If they just stand behind the podium and speak, their presentation will be picked up and should be heard by everyone. So can everybody hear me now in the audience? Yes. Okay, very good, thank you. Then I think what I'd like to do is open this meeting of the Public Safety Committee. With a roll call, we see that Councilor Bob Reckman is present, Councilor David Narkewicz, also present, and Councilor David Murphy. And we'll dispense with the reading of the October minutes and proceed right into the public hearing. And first hear from Teri Anderson and Russ Sienkiewicz and Janet Sheppard.
Thank you, Councilor Carney. I wanted to begin with some background history of how we came to submit this ordinance. The city has been working on a joint homelessness and panhandling collaborative effort for the last 6 years or so. The mayor called together a committee of folks that included homeless advocates, social service agencies, the police department, the mayor's office, and some members from the business community. And there are a number of aspects of the program that we've been working on over these 6 years. First, the city has been very active in being a leader on both the local level through our our housing program, through the planning department, and also on the regional level to work towards a 10-year regional homelessness plan. And the effort there is really on prevention, providing supportive housing, providing long-term affordable housing, and employment training to deal with homelessness issues in our community and also region-wide. We've also been working on an education campaign to inform the community about the kinds of services that are available to people in need in our community, and also working to raise funds to increase the amount of services that are available. We've recently published and have been updating over the last few years a couple of different cards, which I don't have extras here, but they're placed around different offices in City Hall as well as in the businesses downtown that list out all of the services that are available to people in our community, both shelter and food and housing services, and also counseling and support services as well. The Friends of the Homeless has been, originally we had a campaign where we had canisters on the downtown registers and different retail businesses to raise funds to provide meals for the homeless. And that worked for a number of years, and then the donations started to dwindle off. It was also difficult to administer in terms of collecting the donations. So the Friends of the Homeless just recently, you may have seen it, have installed a frog called the Happy Frog. It's down in front of First Church, and it's a donation box. And all of the funds that go into the frog go into providing meals, both community meals and direct vouchers for the homeless and the needy in Northampton. They've raised enough money through that donation box to add another meal a week in the city so far, which brings, I think it's 4 meals, 4 days every week. There's a meal offered in the city. And then the last piece of it is this ordinance. And the history on this and the background on it, the purpose of it is twofold. One is to manage the sidewalks and the public spaces. And this has already been done for other public uses, including news boxes. Musicians have a separate permitting process and requirements for how they can perform downtown. The sidewalk tables and chairs have a separate permitting process. And so again, this is to create a similar kind of regulations for solicitation. And one of the reasons for that is because there are many activities on downtown city sidewalks that are competing uses for the public spaces. It gets quite congested at times, And the goal is to keep open a pedestrian right-of-way on the sidewalks to create space for people to continue pedestrian access. The second goal here is to prevent aggressive and fraudulent solicitation, which over the last few years has become more of a problem downtown, and the mayor's office as well as the police department have received complaints. And I want to point out that, that I think this is a community concern, not just a business concern, because there have been some who have framed it that this is just a business issue. But the concerns that we have heard are from a broader constituency, both residents of the community, visitors to the community, as well as the business community downtown. In terms of how the ordinance works, it does not prohibit solicitation, and also it applies to all solicitation, so it doesn't apply to just panhandling, it also applies to other solicitation activities, so that all solicitors are treated equally across the board. It regulates the time, place, and manner of solicitation. So this does not ban solicitation. It does permit it. It allows it on city sidewalks, and primarily what we're asking is for people to do their solicitation on the brick pavers, which is where we've also asked the musicians to perform also. It creates some setback from certain uses like ATM machines, public toilets, the pay machines, the parking pay meters, not the parking meters, but the pay meters, the parking machines, to create some safety zones where people feel particularly vulnerable around handling money. It decriminalizes solicitation and the activities that we're regulating under here. There are already criminal statutes to enforce aggressive behavior and fraudulent behavior, and this allows the police department to have a civil penalty approach to enforcing aggressive behavior and fraudulent activities. And I'll let Police Chief Sienkiewicz talk about that more in detail. It addresses fraudulent behavior. One of the things that we've noticed is that a lot of the panhandling and the solicitation that happens downtown in recent years is people are framing that they're soliciting for certain organizations when they are not. So we're trying to address that activity as well. Again, our city solicitor, Janet Sheppard, is here, and I'll let her speak to the legality of it, but we've been advised that that this ordinance, and the police department has spent a long time researching it to ensure that it is legally defensible and that it preserves rights of free speech. And then the last thing I wanted to point out is, and I'm hoping people can see it, and you can come up later if you want to take a look, and this map is also on the city website, but we've tried to show visually the areas where solicitation activities are allowed and restricted. So the parking lots that you see are shown here in black, and parking lots are restricted so that panhandling and solicitation would not be permitted in the city public parking lots, in part because we've heard concerns from senior citizens that they've been particularly targeted in the public parking lots. The areas that you see in red or pink are areas of setback where from doorways, from ATM machines, some of the areas that I mentioned previously, where solicitation activities would be restricted. And the green areas, pretty much as you can see all the way up and down Main Street and Pleasant Street, except for in this block because of its proximity to the bank, solicitation would be permitted in accordance with these regulations. So happy to answer any questions later, but I think I'll let Russ and Janet add anything at this point.
Good evening, everyone. Police Chief Russell Sienkiewicz. I'm not going to belabor a lot of the legal points here. That will be up to the city solicitor and I'm sure Attorney Newman. But I will just kind of preface it with a little history. I've been the police chief here since 1994, and it seems every 2 years the issue of complaints about behavior on the city streets, particularly when it comes to solicitation, an aggressive and fraudulent manner occurs. You know, we've struggled with the issue for years. Our department takes the constitutional rights of individuals very seriously. As you know, freedom of speech is well respected and allowed here in a lot of ways, freedom of assembly. But it was really in the past year or two that it came to a head that there was a much more serious concern about the level of the soliciting behavior on the streets in Northampton. And we looked at it. The mayor's office asked the department to try to research the case laws, other statutes that are existing in other states, and myself and my command staff, Captain Conkus and Captain Patnode, and I spent a great deal of time looking at different research papers, looking at the opportunities and alternatives that might exist. And we did it all with the mind of trying to be respectful of everyone and trying to develop a viable city ordinance that would balance the rights of all for a peaceful coexistence on the public ways of the city of Northampton. We also understand that there's current regulations that do concern activities on public sidewalks and public ways, and doing an analysis of those helped us get to the point where we refined a lot of the language. We consulted with Attorney Newman throughout the process, had some spirited discussions, and obviously we're not at a complete consensus agreement at this point, but I think we're very close to what needs to be examined here for a proper ability for my police department to have the tools to do the job that they're being asked to do. And frankly, I've always said police departments are the reflection of the community that they serve, and this has been a community of requests for a great period of time for us to try to address. The thing that I need to emphasize that Teri Anderson said, this is not a prohibition. This is not a prohibition against this activity. There are many communities throughout the United States have constitutionally solid ordinances that completely prohibit this type of activity from geographic areas and business districts. We're not looking to do that. We feel that there's a certain need for the truly needy and homeless, and I must say homeless and panhandlers are not a mutually inclusive group, but we think looking at the three balance points that we're trying to get at. The first was to address aggressive panhandling. The language by the court cases has to be specific and clear. We think we've done that. And as Attorney Newman has pointed out, that there's current state statutes that would be able to allow us to regulate the behavior. But those state statutes all exist in a criminalized nature. And by utilizing those against the truly needy on the streets, you are further disenfranchising them from the community by charging them criminally, by bringing them into court. Several of them are arrestable. This ordinance is not arrestable. We truly believe that this is an opportunity for us to use the ordinances to decriminalize this activity, be involved just in a fine for really a deterrent aspect of the type of activity we're trying to regulate. And again, I keep saying regulate, not prohibiting. This is a time and manner issue and a place issue, which is, again, respective of some of Attorney Newman's opinions. The law does allow us to do this. It does in other ways in the community. The benefit case is the landmark case in 1997 that has brought forth a lot of the language that the type of establishment of these ordinances in very other communities, and other communities are struggling with this. But one needs to understand benefit in its true manner. Was at the point in time in Cambridge, Mr. Benefit was arrested and charged for public begging without a license, and the Supreme Court ruled that persons, in the statute's language was just this: persons wandering abroad and begging, or who go about from door to door in public or private ways, areas to which the general public is invited, or in other places for the purpose of begging or to receive alms, and who are not licensed. It was thrown out on constitutionality grounds because they felt that type of activity shouldn't be licensed. We are not proposing that. And we feel strongly that the benefit case, although it does have some interesting language and interpretations, to the point, the fact is it was a state statute that required the licensing of begging and the terms used back then. We're not doing that. These are non-arrestable city ordinance violations that would be subject to a fine only. The third point, the fraudulent solicitations, that's probably the most difficult for people to deal with. My police officers are out there on a daily basis, a nightly basis. They know the players in the street. They see the folks out there that are misrepresenting themselves for any number of reasons, to make an income, to support their substance abuse in some cases, and frankly are competing, I believe, unfairly against the truly needy, the truly homeless in our community, who are out there trying to get money to support themselves, to get the food that they need, to try to help them get sometimes temporary lodging in hotels. And this kind of fraudulent solicitation unfairly takes money out of those folks' pockets. If we're able to get rid of the fraudulent solicitors, we in fact are supporting our truly needy in our community, the truly homeless. And I believe this ordinance will address that. But to implement it, there's a three-pronged strategy. The first one, again, the courts have ruled, there needs to be an education component, which we have plans in doing based on the final language. That's informing all the players of what the rules of engagement are on the street, informing the citizens, informing the merchants, informing the residents downtown who constantly complain to us about this issue. And the fact that it carries a fine instead of a jail sentence or a criminal charge. It acts as a deterrence. The second point, we've already seen just the rumor of this ordinance have what we feel is a positive effect on some of the fraudulent folks and some of the aggressive folks. They haven't been in our downtown area in recent months because the rumor is to some of them that this ordinance is in place. So we believe the deterrent aspect is a valuable part of this. And again, the deterrence is there because of the third point, enforcement. In order for us to properly prosecute and criminalize a misdemeanor charge of fraudulent, larceny by fraudulent means or by false pretenses, it takes a rather lengthy investigation, and the burden of proof is higher for us to be able to finally prosecute, go through the hearing process. So the enforcement is kind of our last point on this, but we feel with the first 2 points, education and deterrence, will have a much more positive effect, and the final piece is the enforcement, a non-criminal enforcement. Certainly gives my police officers the tools to do the job that they need to do in the street. And again, with a certain amount of discretion, because that's what police officers do and are entitled to do. They look at the totality of the circumstances and make their decisions based on their enforcement opportunities, whether it's a speeding ticket or anything else. So again, our bottom line is to have a fair and equitable, a balanced approach to this, be respectful of the parties that are involved in it, the truly needy, and also have the peaceful coexistence of our streets. The geographic area that's laid out, and I've heard different comments and postings and whatnot that we're essentially moving everybody away from the street completely. That's just not based in fact. We methodically looked at a GIS map for the city, and that's how we arrived at the geographic separation areas from the doorways, from the ATMs, and et cetera. And it's really just placing all solicitors, again, it's not discriminating against any one class or individual or any specific content of what they're saying, but all solicitors are be placed in the same area that street musicians and artists are now allowed by regulation to exist. So we hope the Public Safety Committee hears our concerns. I look at this as, again, I say just a tool. You know, we come before you with an opportunity for you to look at giving my officers an additional tool without budgetary strings attached to it, as I'm usually here asking for money to be able to do things. But here we're asking you to exercise and what your goal is or what your duty is as a legislative body is we have presented you with what we think is a very sound, legally tenable, which Solicitor Sheppard will explain, ordinance to allow our people to do the right thing on the street, to do what needs to be done. And the fact that the document is finally in its form that it is, it's your opportunity to debate it, deliberate it, fine-tune it if you feel the need to, but we strongly believe the language is of value to the goals that we've been asked to accomplish here. So, thank you.
Thank you. Janet?
I'd just like to say that I think that there are two issues here. One is whether or not this statute, this ordinance, is constitutional. And then the second one is the policy argument, which you will take up in the legislative process. The policy of whether or not you think that it's appropriate to have an ordinance on the books that regulates this activity. You have two opinions here, one from myself and one from Mr. Newman. I only briefly had a chance to look at Attorney Newman's, but I would just go through mine. You have it. It says, in my opinion, that this statute ordinance is constitutional. It regulates time, place, and manner, which are allowed under the Constitution. As both the police chief and Teri Anderson have said, we have tried to fine-tune this ordinance to make sure that it does not tread on anybody's First Amendment rights. Just for an example, we've all recently been through the Democratic and Republican conventions, and they have what they call a free speech zone, which is nowhere near the convention. It's in a gated area. It's fenced off, and the Constitution allows that. We're not trying to do that. What we're trying to do is to create space so that everyone can share the sidewalk. And it's a regulation that's intended to have a community share the same space. I'd like to make a few points about what Mr. Newman said in his letter to you, dated November 21st, that the police chief has already talked about benefit, and that case has to do with peaceful solicitation and making peaceful solicitation a crime. We did not do that here. It's not criminal. The second thing in his letter that I'd like to point out is that he said that this statute is redundant. Redundancy is not unconstitutional. We understand that there's a criminal law and a civil law. That's our intention. And to decriminalize this behavior, as the police chief has said, we think is a good thing. And then finally, there are some language suggestions. I have to say this is the first time that I've seen them. I certainly do not object to having changes in the language if people think that that makes it clearer what the intention of the statute, the ordinance is. And so if you do choose to put some of these changes into the ordinance, I would just ask that we review it before it goes forward to the council. Unless you have any further questions about the legality, as I've said before, both in my written statement to you and today, that I think that this is a constitutional ordinance, and I will stand behind it. Thanks.
And I just want to reiterate that this is a public hearing tonight, and we've dedicated the time for public hearing. I'm hoping that we would be able to hear from the public probably between now and 9 o'clock, but that's not hard and firm. I think what people should know is that we're not required to necessarily deliberate or make a decision tonight. This committee does have the option to continue or take the time that it takes to ingest what we have from all of the public and from the proponents and from Attorney Newman, and take the steps from there. But just to reiterate, this could be a very long process. So,
But we can ask, I believe, the public to be relatively brief.
again, not to take too much time, but what my intention is to hear the proposed legislation, because Councilor Reckman had a long and detailed correspondence with Attorney Newman. We hope to hear a bit from Attorney Newman on that. Also hear from the public, but as we see, there are many, many people. Just so you know, I'm hoping to limit the each comment to 3 minutes, as is usual in our city council practice, but also to ask folks, as they hear people speaking, if they hear that what they've had to say has already been said, you know, to basically just say, I agree with what's been said, and add something new if they have something new to add. So that's just to take up time, but of course everyone has the right to take the time and whatever they need to inform us of your opinions on this matter. So I think that we'll forego any dialogue right now, if it's okay with the rest of the committee, with Chief Sienkiewicz, with Teri, and with Attorney Sheppard. And I'll ask if we can hear from Attorney Newman on this matter.
I've written Councilor Reckman a letter, and I understand he shared it, and I'm happy to go over any aspect of that you'd like to hear about. I'll spend just a minute, literally not more than that, just to outline the 3 areas that this ordinance addresses. I'll try to indicate the areas where I think the ordinance has made substantial progress towards being a constitutionally sufficient document, and then I'd like to highlight the areas where I think it's greatly deficient. First of all, there are 3 areas. And over the course of the various committees that have deliberated about this, there has at least been some clarification of what the ordinance is trying to get to, which I think is all to the good. One area, and I think the ordinance is closest on this, I think it still has serious drafting problems, but I think it's closest, is the area of what is called, and I use the terms of the ordinance, a quote, aggressive panhandling. And what aggressive panhandling is, under the terms of this ordinance, is a reiteration of state law on assault, and there are various kinds of assault in Massachusetts. One is a threat to commit a battery, that's an unwanted touching, putting a person in fear of a battery, fear of an unwanted touching. Those are assaults. Assault and battery, which is a unwanted touching, threat to commit a crime, which itself is a crime, disturbing the peace, disorderly conduct, criminal harassment, and at the extreme, stalking. Now, as I've said in the letter, and I think as is clear, the fact that one combines words with any of those actions does not make the crime lawful. It's still a crime. It can even make the crime worse. You have an assault and battery and people are expressing vitriol about race or religion or ethnicity, for example, and it becomes a hate crime. It can be worse with the words. That said, what is called aggressive soliciting in this ordinance still needs amendment in order, I think, because it has aspects of it that are vague and overbroad. But with that, I think that that aspect of the ordinance that is simply taking state law on assault and battery and all the other crimes I've mentioned and incorporating them and restating it as an ordinance is something I agree you have the authority to do. I would point out that the police have and the prosecution have always had the authority to take misdemeanor charges like that and convert them to civil infractions. So there's nothing new here with that. But if you want to do it, because somehow you think it's important, you can take those series of crimes and make them, I think the ordinance needs to be spelled out to say it's only subject to civil infraction, but I think you can do that. I also point out that if someone wants to just pay the fine, that will obviously obviate court proceedings. If someone wants to contest it, you can be into as much of and as protracted and as complex a court proceeding on a civil action as you can in a misdemeanor criminal complaint, particularly a misdemeanor criminal complaint that can already be converted to a civil action. So again, that's a policy matter if you want to undertake it, but I think in that area the ordinance begins to get close to what would be constitutionally sufficient, and as a policy matter makes some sense if you want to do it. The second aspect of the ordinance is the fraudulent, what's called the thing, fraudulent panhandling, but really is a reiteration again of the common law of larceny. Larceny by trick, larceny by deceit, larceny by fraud, larceny by misrepresentation, larceny by false pretenses. And again, I think this needs more work, but I think it can be done. And again, that the fact if someone commits larceny, And some of that can be done by words or by indirection. Simply putting more words with it does not make the larceny or larceny by false pretenses legal. It just doesn't. I point out again that the police, with the prosecution's assent, have always had the authority to convert those misdemeanors, when they are misdemeanors, to a civil infraction. You don't need a new ordinance to do that. But again, that's a policy matter for the council to determine. The third aspect, so again, I think that with work, those two aspects of the ordinance can be formed into something the council would feel content with, and that I think would, I think it does need work. I don't want to minimize that, but I think that can be done. It's certainly moved in a direction that is restating law and criminal law, and no one is suggesting that those cannot become part of a city ordinance. That said, the third part of the ordinance, I think, that needs the most work and that is most distressing is the part having to do with the definition of solicitation itself and with the prohibitions on solicitation in the streets. There are a number of aspects of that. And let me just give a couple of examples because I think people are familiar with them. And during the run-up to the last election, there were canvassers out here from the Democratic National Committee saying, we want you to contribute, we want you to sign this petition, and we want you to give money to the DNC. Under this ordinance, that's illegal. If you're walking up the street and you're having a conversation about giving to the United Way, you can't do that unless you step off and stop in the pavers. And anytime you get within 6 feet of a building entrance or 15 feet of a bank, or you're going past an ATM, you got to stop and be quiet. Now, some of that is a drafting problem with the definition of solicitation, and some of it is, in fact, a policy problem with what the ordinance tries to get to. Now, I have said before, and it's true, and I appreciate that various committees and Teri Anderson have been very cordial in inviting my participation, but I continue to say what I think has not really been given adequate heed, which is that the ordinance should focus on behavior, not on words. And again, I think that if you did that, you could obviate the constitutional problems. Let me just say one thing about this, because there's a lot of talk about what the court will do and what the court won't do. Every councilor, every elected official takes an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of Massachusetts, of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And it is incumbent on every elected official in a legislative capacity to, in fact, enforce that Constitution as he or she sees it and believes it to require. So it's not just a question of what does the court ultimately say. In terms of the actions or behavior that the city wishes to constrain, I'd point out one piece of the letter, and that's the current ordinance on 285-12C1. No person shall engage in any activity upon any city sidewalks or streets in a manner that endangers the safety and rightful passage of pedestrian traffic. We are talking here about pedestrian traffic. We are talking about people having the right to, as they do, to walk freely down the streets without being harassed and without being impeded. And I agree, there is that right, and I think it's an important one for the city to uphold. And there is another ordinance which, in fact, does specifically that. It says, no person shall accost another person in any street with obscene or profane language. There are already ordinances on the books which would allow the police, if they had the resources to do it, to enforce 95% of what this ordinance is trying to get to. So I'm not a great fan of let's pass a law to say we passed a law. Because it somehow creates a different tool, another mechanism, where I don't think it really does. Let me just say a couple of other words. The over breadth of the ordinance is of significant concern. I really think that no one on this council wants to say that if you're walking down the street asking a friend to give $50 to the United Way, that you have to stop every time you get within 6 feet of the entrance to a building, or you're getting near a bank, or you're not on the pavers. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. I don't think anyone really believes that. With that in mind, I think that all the behavior that you find objectionable, and that is objectionable, assaultive behavior, batteries, intimidation, which I've noted the legal definition of in this letter, threats to commit a crime, ripping people off, committing larceny. No one's saying that's okay. I'm not saying that's okay. No one's defending it. And if you want to make it subject to a lesser penalty, you have that authority to do that. But I do think that when it comes to telling people that they can't sit on a bench and ask someone for a contribution, that's just wrong. To try to say that the solicitors, the canvassers from the Democratic National Committee can't do what they did during this election I don't think that any court would uphold that, and I don't think that any city councilor really would want to vote for that. And yet that's the ordinance that you have in front of you. So I suggest first that soliciting is not second-class speech. It's important speech. And it is true, I think, that there is a discomfort that people feel around seeing a poor person asking for money. Because if you're walking by and you have a suit and tie on and you got money in your pocket and someone says, "Can I have 50 cents for a cup of coffee?" You know what? It makes you feel uncomfortable. It should. And it's constitutionally protected for that person to ask. To say we're going to restrict all of that in some interests of because the laws that we have and the ordinances we have are insufficient, I suggest is not true. The ordinances you have are more than sufficient. The laws you have are more than sufficient. And I would suggest that if you're going to wish to have a piece of this with regard to assaultive behavior, fraudulent behavior, fine. But when it comes to restricting words, I think you best be and should be very careful, very circumspect, and that this ordinance needs to be, I think, defeated in its present form because of its restrictions on words. Asking for money for survival is not second-class speech.
I'll ask folks to really keep it down because we have a long night ahead of us. I have a question now from Councilor Narkewicz.
You spend a good deal of time in your letter, which will get up on the website ASAP, talking about benefit, and there seems to be some dispute between you and the city solicitor about the benefit case. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not sure where the disagreement is. I think that benefit says a number of things that are crucial. It involved a state statute that was declared unconstitutional, and what benefit says that I think is crucial for the council to consider is that this kind of an ordinance restricting freedom of speech has to meet the strict scrutiny tests. It has to meet a compelling state interest, and that compelling state interest has to be narrowly drawn to meet that interest. And those are the criteria for restrictions on speech. It is true that what we're talking about are time, place, and manner restrictions. Absolutely right. But we're talking about reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions in light of and subject to the requirement that there be, that they meet the strict scrutiny test, that there be a compelling state interest, and that the ordinance be narrowly drawn to meet that compelling state interest. I'm not sure where the disagreement on benefit is, but benefit to that extent is absolutely in the mainstream of First Amendment law.
Okay, and again, I'm hoping that we have a lot of time to deliberate, and are hoping that Attorney Newman, you'd be available again for some process of deliberation, as well as Attorney Sheppard and Chief Sienkiewicz and Teri. But I think that given we've spent 45 minutes in this introduction, I would like to open it up to some public comment. And I'd ask if there was somebody there in the front row who might bring me that list of, thank you, Jesse, of folks who've signed up to give public comment. I'm not sure that everybody had the opportunity to sign, and if you didn't, I will still make available at the end of the list the opportunity for folks who still need some comment, who still want to make some comment, to do that. So, without further ado, I would like to go ahead and, again, I'd like to limit this comment to 3 minutes and ask folks if they can be more concise. That would be great, since I'm looking at a number of pages of comment here. So, first I would like to hear from Steve Tilton. And again, I'd like folks to state their name and address before they give public comment.
Councilman, council ladies, my name is Stephen Tilton. I'm a Vietnam vet, and I am homeless. I am here tonight to advocate for everybody that is homeless. I gave up my bed tonight at the shelter right next to the police department to be here. I have no place to go tonight. I'm just saying, I am here to advocate for all the homeless people, and not all the homeless people are aggressive. They're not mean, they're not nasty. They're just people trying to get, like you said, 50 cents to get a cup of coffee. 50 cents, maybe it's for a beer. It doesn't matter. As long as you see them sitting there, and I'm homeless, and if I have money in my pocket, I'll give a homeless person underneath the bridge going over towards Pops, and everybody knows where Pops is. I'll give somebody 25 cents, 50 cents. If I have it on me, I'll give it to them. And I am homeless, and like I said, I advocate for all these people, because all these people, right, they need a helping hand. And I'm a vet, and it doesn't matter about me. What matters is that I'm up here talking to you all, right? And what I want to say to you is, please don't ban, solicitation, because it's not what you all should do. I know a girl, her name is Sherry, all right? She weaves. She makes hand warmers. She makes hats. She doesn't ask for anything. She just sits there and does her little crocheting, her weaving. She's not asking. She's not aggressive. She's nothing except trying to help herself, so that she doesn't have to be homeless, especially during these times. And these times are really hard on everybody. I don't care who you are, how much money you make. You all know it. These are hard times. Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, everything. It's hard on us all. Am I right or wrong? Thank you. This is all I have to say. And I'd wish one of the councilwomen would call up over there and tell them that I'll be in. Thank you for smiling. But seriously, I gave up my spot in the homeless shelter just to come here and voice my opinion. And I'm not being mean, I'm not being rowdy, as you know. I'm just saying, give us a chance. Give us, the homeless, a chance. We're not bad people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tilton. And I'll also ask folks to pay attention to time and just maybe refrain from a lot of applause, if that's okay for tonight, just so that we can get through the number of list of folks we have to speak. I apologize because I pulled up page 2, and in fact, the first person who had signed up to speak tonight was Jesse Adams.
My question
Thank you.
was answered. My question was answered. Thanks.
Okay, and you'd like to forego and
Yes.
pass to the next person? Okay, thank you, Jesse. I'd like to hear then from Rich Matowitz.
Hi, my name is Rich Matowitz. I work at Thorns Marketplace. I work for the Hampshire Property Management Group. We manage about a dozen properties in and around downtown Northampton. We also provide commercial leasing for those dozen properties for the most part. I don't want to talk about the social aspects. I think the business community is very sensitive to the social aspects. We understand that it requires an all-encompassing solution, one that we can't provide, one that requires a lot of resources. But what I do want to talk about is the economics of the panhandling. I want to talk about 2 points in particular. The first point is when I'm doing commercial leasing in and around town, and there's a panhandler or there's a homeless person in the front entryway door, the person I'm trying to sell whatever space or retail or office is immediately turned off. If you use the analogy of somebody trying to sell your home and you had a homeless person or a panhandler in front of the front door and you're trying to sell your condominium or home, it'd have a detrimental effect. Has that effect in Northampton as well, and affects the rental stream of property owners. Second point I'd like to make is that the aggressive panhandling has had a detrimental effect on the retailers and the sales volume in and around town. And if you don't take a snapshot of what Northampton looks like today, but take a long view, 10, 20, 50 years, if you allow the extent of panhandling to continue at the current level, you are going to diminish the sales volume in Northampton. And I suspect if you work on the economics, no one knows this, but I bet for every one panhandler, you'll have one less teacher or police officer or fireman in town. If you have a dozen, that's 12 less public servants. And I think that as city councilors, you have a fiduciary duty to respect the Constitution, but you also have to realize about the effect you're having in the town in the long term. That's the point that I would like to make. There's an absolute cost to this. It's significant, and it affects the revenue stream of the city of Northampton. Thank you.
Thank you. Lois Ahrens?
Hello, everybody. My name is Lois Ahrens. I live in Ward 1, and I've lived there for 26 of the 28 years that I've lived in Northampton. For all these years, I've lived about less than 10 blocks away from downtown Northampton, and have gone there for one thing or another, probably at least 5 out of every 7 days for all of these years. So I feel like I'm pretty familiar with downtown Northampton. As Janet Sheppard said, there are two different questions here, whether the legality and the constitutionality, and to me, is this something that the city wants to make an ordinance? And I'm going to talk about the part two, not the legality, since I'm not a lawyer, thank God. I'm here tonight to speak in opposition to the ordinance. It seems to me that if the city was seeking a solution to what some view as a problem with the very few, and I have heard and read the number of troublesome people to be less than 5, then the response would not be an ordinance drafted by the police and the Office of Economic Development with the support of the Chamber of Commerce and some downtown merchants. I view this ordinance as an effort by the city acting on behalf of some in the business community and their allies in city government to make Northampton a place where tourists and shoppers can visit and shop unencumbered by anyone they view as disturbing their comfort level. I see the ordinance as an integral part of an ongoing process by the mayor and others to sanitize Northampton through the building of the so-called Garden Hotel in Pulaski Park, supporting the privatizing of city service through the Business Improvement District, and including the privatizing of police. I'm concerned that ticketing people for behavior that we deem unacceptable or somebody deems unacceptable is still another way of criminalizing behavior that is not criminal. If it were criminal, there are already laws, which Bill talked about, which police could enforce, and I'm not advocating greater enforcement here. I understand that people receiving tickets will be offered options other than jail. However, what will happen to people who do not want that option, or when programs are full and can't take new clients, and the ticketed people don't have money to pay the tickets? Do they then go to jail for failure to pay the $100 ticket? And then do all of us as taxpayers pay an average of $130 a day to keep this person in jail?
30 seconds.
This is precisely what is happening in other cities where policing, privatized and otherwise, are ticketing of people for their behavior. Given that the recession we are facing is deepening, it seems that there will be more, not less, people panhandling in the city. If the city is seeking a real solution to panhandling, I ask that the council reject this ordinance and seek a more humane, less punitive, and more constructive response. Thank you.
Judith Fine?
Thank you, Judith Fine. We live in a regulated society. We're told that regulations protect the individual and also provide safety for the masses. Here in Northampton, like it or not, we have regulations for just about everything. We voted to have districts that may dictate what color paint you may use for the exterior of your home. We have regulations that tell me what size sign I may put on the facade of my business. We have regulations about sandwich boards. We have regulations about skateboarding on the sidewalk. We even have regulations telling me what I may put in my window, especially if I sell items of a suggestive nature. We have regulations for street musicians, street artists, and sidewalk cleanliness. Some of these may protect the public. Others seem to have a questionable, dizzying effect. All of them were done with the intention of helping to maintain a vibrant, unique, diverse, and safe place to shop, live, visit, and be. The ordinance before you, dubbed the Solicitation Ordinance, regulates where a person may locate themselves if they are asking pedestrians for money. This is whether you are a Girl Scout selling cookies, raising money to send a team to a parade, ringing the kettle at holiday time, asking passers-by for change. This regulation, different than the one currently on the books, decriminalizes these activities. It does not ban them. It does not say you may not ask. It does not say that this is an unacceptable activity. It simply states that if you are asking, this is where you may ask. It regulates that you may not block a doorway, that you may not sit and lean against a building, that you may not harass an individual if they do not wish to give. I'm offended that because I'm in favor of the passage of this ordinance, I have been dubbed anti-poverty, against a diverse downtown, mean-spirited, and ungenerous. Nothing could be further from the truth. The downtown businesses are among the most generous individuals in our community. We give and give and give and give. Everyone walks into our establishments asking for support for a myriad list of causes, and we give and give. We had canisters on our counters raising money for the hungry and homeless. We recently helped to raise awareness and funds for the installation of the Happy Frog, raising money for the hungry and homeless. We now have small meal and housing tickets to give to our customers so that they may give them to individuals who may be in need. We have the assurance of the nonprofits that serve the hungry and homeless that they visit these street folks every day, making them aware of the free services available. We have been assured from our police department, our mayor, and the nonprofits that serve this population that this is a humane, fair way to regulate and reinforce the caring for good folks who may be down on their luck, hungry, jobless, homeless, or even those that are collecting so that they may buy cigarettes, drugs, or feed their pets. This ordinance does not make any distinctions about why you are asking. It simply states that if you ask, please stand on the brick paver of the side of the sidewalk, providing safe, easy, comfortable passage for everyone else. I am offended by the false accusations that this passage will gentrify our diverse, welcoming downtown. Why would we want to take a formula that we have developed over decades and destroy what we call our gem? Accusation of gentrification, the meaning is meaningless in this context. The dictionary defines the process in which a neighborhood is transformed from low-value to high-value properties. Gentrification of downtown Northampton started 30 years ago. If gentrification of Northampton did not happen 30 years ago, we would not be the gem of the city that everybody wants to come to do whatever activities they wish. The number one complaint from our customers is aggressive solicitation, inhibition from coming downtown, even walking down the sidewalk, discomfort to take money out of a street ATM, eating outside, strolling on a beautiful day with family and out-of-towners, wanting to show off this gem of a downtown that we all call home. Please support this regulation. 8 years in the making. asking the people that see our downtown streets as a place to improve whatever their circumstances, asking them to help our community of businesses, shoppers, clients, and visitors feel safe, hassle-free, and unimpeded, and for all to feel welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last one. Could I hear now from Suzanne Beck, please?
My name is Suzanne Beck. I'm here tonight as the Executive Director of the Greater Northampton Chamber of Commerce and representing the Chamber's support for the proposed ordinance. We believe this ordinance is necessary because of the number of daily conflicts on the sidewalks. The number of incidents of panhandling has disrupted business, blocked access to doorways and passage on the sidewalks. For downtown shops and restaurants, panhandling is their number one concern about doing business in downtown, and it is also a number one concern of their customers. Businesses have suffered for several years without the protection of a regulation that governs not who can be on the street, but how people on the street can share the space and better respect each other's rights to be there. And that is the intent of this ordinance. It helps to balance the interests and rights of all constituencies who share use of the public sidewalks in downtown Northampton, whether they be businesses, employees, residents, customers, or panhandlers. These constituencies have an equal right to the freedom of access and use of the public sidewalks, and this ordinance is designed to protect all of them. There is precedent, as you've heard, for managing the use of the sidewalks through regulations. If you are an artist who wants to sell on the sidewalks, you are required to get a permit from the DPW and can occupy one of several locations that have been designated. If you are a street musician and would like to perform downtown, you are also required to get a permit from the DPW. The same applies to street performers and any organization that wants to distribute literature or promote a cause. The intent of the proposed ordinance is similar to the purpose of these permits and existing regulations. They are designed to protect public safety, public convenience, and the rights and interests of residents, shoppers, diners, employees, businesses, and the general public. Teri mentioned that there has been a long process over the last 6 years to talk about and manage an approach to the panhandling issue. The Chamber has been involved in that process with the Mayor's office, the police department, and social service agencies. In short, there has been a cooperative process over several years to understand and resolve these conflicts. The Chamber believes that the proposed ordinance is a very reasonable solution to these issues. The ordinance does not jeopardize necessary support for people in need. Many services are available in Northampton to assist them. There is a social worker on the street who talks to people every day to connect them with the assistance that they may need. Street musicians, nonprofit organizations, and others who want to occupy downtown sidewalks are required to follow city regulations. This ordinance treats solicitation the same way. In short, the ordinance protects access for pedestrians and customers to downtown offices, residents, and businesses, and that is the reason that the Chamber is endorsing it. I would like to take a moment just to thank the police department for taking the time to draft the ordinance and the careful attention that they've given to the community in which they're proposing it. And I'd also like to submit a number of signatures on a petition that was filled out by or signed by residents and customers of downtown businesses.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Could I hear now from Bill Dwight? Please. Okay.
Hey.
Very good. Thank you.
Hello. It's worth pointing out, as you have pointed out, that this is not law yet. It's being deliberated. It's a proposed law, and it's being deliberated and considered in the process. That's how the process works. It's you folks are doing your jobs. This is how city governance functions, and I respect you and do not envy you one bit. I've sat where you've sat. I don't sit there anymore because I don't I understand trying to reconcile these conflicts, or I did it for 8 years. I feel I've done my bit anyway. So anyway, and I know that also the rhetoric can become heated and polarizing, particularly when you're talking about issues and debates that touch on cultural issues. So I respect your process, and I most of all respect you, and I respect all the people who propose this. The soliciting ordinance was drafted to address legitimate concerns, I believe, of citizens, visitors, business owners that have been emphatically expressing for many years now to several mayors, many city councilors, and more than a few police officials. Some variation of these conflicts has been discussed for decades here in Northampton. I would argue even generations. And a variety of solutions have been crafted and or tried over time with limited success or failure. And this ordinance is another attempt to accommodate those concerns of all the constituents, as Suzanne Beck mentioned. But I consider the law flawed, and in several aspects, and I hope this committee will make a negative recommendation to the council, and I hope that the council will vote it down when the time comes. I do believe that it will survive a constitutional challenge, I have no doubt, because I know that an assiduous effort's been made to draft this ordinance according to legal precedent and with the concern of people's rights. But I don't really think that's the point. The law is not going to satisfy anyone because the circumstances that stimulated this debate are not going to be reconciled. Businesses will still be challenged by a daunting economy. People will still congregate downtown because, well, it's because it's our community, and it's their right to do so. And there will still be people who will be annoyed and people who will be disturbed and even feel intimidated by the presence of other people if this ordinance makes it to the books. Regardless, those circumstances will remain unchanged. I also do believe that it sets up an us versus them dynamic that's antithetical to the ethos of Northampton. As a community, we advance to the rest of the world that we are tolerant and we are courageous, even when difference causes us discomfort. Laws should protect us from harm, not from people that make us feel uncomfortable. I understand that one of the intentions here is to provide the police with some flexibility when dealing with complaints. And right now, they can only respond with a criminal arrest. But actually, I think that's the intervention threshold that should be in place. That's where I think it should stay. We do have good laws, as Councilor Newman has said, that protect people from assault and physical harm. Everyone's kind of accepted that. And even perceived threats. And I don't think it should be simpler to make people keep moving along. And I don't think I trust that the police department, I trust implicitly this police chief, and these police officers, and I have the utmost respect for them. I have worked with them, and I know them to be. I worked with the chief to eliminate loitering laws. It was his call. The chief said that the loitering laws in this city were unconstitutional. In fact, the laws that everyone referred to that are currently on the books were drafted by the chief and deliberated here in this council. The ones that, restrict people's right to proceed and the like. But this ordinance doesn't apply to these officers. The ordinance is it's blind to whoever the enforcement personnel is. We don't know who will be mayor, we don't know who will be police chief, and we don't know who the police officers will be. We're not supposed to. The law is supposed to be made for any police official. So, how many minutes?
Wrap it up here, Bill.
Wrap it up, okay. Sorry, well, we're not talking about pigeons here, obviously. If you made a law, you couldn't get pigeons to get off the roof. And I think soliciting as an activity is nothing more than annoying to some people, and when it's not, when it becomes under the auspices of aggressive, such as touching, grabbing, and threatening, they're already covered legally. And remember how people once felt about public breastfeeding or same-sex couples walking down the street holding hands or making out. That made them uncomfortable too, and maybe they chose not to shop here for those same reasons because of those circumstances. It's not the reason to create a law. So we're debating rules that will compel a class of people engaged in an activity that is legal to prescribe special behaviors and circumstances. You're considering a non-criminal statute that deals with temporal challenge ineffectively, and the unintended consequence is the message that's transmitted, despite many good and honest efforts to do otherwise, that says Northampton deals with behavior that makes us uncomfortable by creating laws restricting that behavior we are better than this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Folks, please, could we now hear from Steve Connor?
I don't know how Bill cut in front of me. Yeah, you probably put your name up above. Hi, I'm Steve Connor. I am the Director of Veterans Services. I also used to work with an agency that worked with the poor and the disabled. I was even a CETA worker. I worked with the poor and have been poor myself. The exact constitutionality of the ordinance and how it would pass legally, I have no concept of. I'm only going to talk about veterans issues. What I would like to see in this city is a way that this ordinance has purported to do, regulate those that are soliciting under false pretense. There are people who, as you know, up and down the street who have signs that say, I am a homeless vet, or I am an injured vet with no benefits. I can come up with 7 quickly in this past year where we've had that happen. My staff and myself have walked down and handed my business card and say, if you are out of money, you don't need to be. You can come to my office. Okay? Out of the people that we approached, out of the 7, I know from personal experience that some of them have not been veterans. 3 of them already, who were veterans, already received benefits from the VA and or my office. And one in particular who said he was an injured veteran and had no income, actually was overqualified for benefits from me because his income was so high. So, I'm hoping with an ordinance, this one or any one that people can come up with that's constitutional, will help me deter from that. Because what happens is I then have people who are downtown come to my office, call up my office, and wonder why I'm not helping them out. I end up having to come in front of the city council probably 3 times a year asking for money to help people out. In 4.5 years, I've had 1,000% increase on the number of veterans and or their dependents who are receiving benefits from my office. I don't turn anyone away. If they are qualified, we give them. If they're out on the street, we go down and find them. What I'm waiting for is the ones that really are qualified or who need the benefits for veterans. My other issue is, often I will walk down the street to get lunch and somebody comes up to me and says, oh, I'm raising money for homeless veterans, disabled veterans. I'm raising money to build a home for veterans. And all I do is I stop and I ask a couple of questions, and the next thing you know, they walk away and they go to the next person because I know what organizations work with veterans. So I would like to be able to then just say, I'd like to call up the police chief and say, there's somebody out there soliciting, and it's not a real cause. Because what happens from that is I go out and I work hard. I work with churches, I work with the synagogue. We go out to try to raise money to help veterans in need, whether it's a Vietnam vet, whether it's a Korean War vet, or whether it's a returning veteran. I'm going to have a harder time, and I do have a harder time, when somebody is also taking money downtown and all they're doing is taking it, leaving town, and going to have dinner. And I know that happened. I was at the same place the guy went to have dinner.
If you could wrap it up, please.
Okay. And I would hope that no matter what the ordinance turns out, that the people that are here, both for and against the ordinance, that at least 10% of them would join us, the people that I work with, that work for the disadvantaged and the disempowered in this community, and put effort in like this to help feeding these people, housing these people, and supporting these folks that are on the street. that they are all here to talk about. I also have a statement from the head of the Council on Aging, and thank you for listening.
Thank you. Could we hear, please, from Katie Simon? Thanks.
Hello, I'm Katie Simon. I'm representing Poverty is Not a Crime. And I just like to say that I just like to address the issues of public safety, which of course is what this committee is about. I'd like to say that the rhetoric around public safety concerning this ordinance is just that, rhetoric. This is a profit-driven ordinance about homogenizing and sanitizing the streets of our city at the expense of poor people's needs and the vibrant culture of this city. $35,000 was put into the Business Improvement District project. One of whose goals is to, quote, reduce panhandling and to increase police presence in the city. Where is that money for the training program that Ms. Anderson spoke about? Where is it for the food distribution program? Why should the poor rely on donations while the businesses rely on money, on thousands of dollars, directly from the city? Why do the homeless only get a happy frog while the gentrification gets thousands of dollars? Why is it that food distribution in this city is run by nonprofits and not by the city itself? Why can't we, if we have enough money to put that much money into business, why don't we have enough money to put that into making it 7 days a week instead of celebrating that finally there's 4 days a week there's a meal for the homeless? What do they do the other 3? If you had come out with this ordinance and at the same time put in a huge amount of money for the underfunded social services here, maybe my organization and the people who are opposed to the ordinance in this community wouldn't be so upset about it. My notes are so weird. The Business Improvement District itself is kind of amusingly guilty of aggressive soliciting. A friend of mine was called 2 or 3 times after she had said no to them. Let's see. Ms. Anderson talks about community concern about panhandling, yet the mayor herself, when she spoke to us, said that the violence and intimidation are not, we asked for specific data. She said it's mostly a problem of perception. You can't balance a First Amendment right against perception. The only people that we haven't had any actual studies about panhandling, aggression, and intimidation. The only people we've heard from really are businesses with proponent businesses with vested interest, citing anonymous complaints from their customers. I'm not devalidating the fact that aggressive panhandling can and does take place. I am saying that it takes place in a huge minority of instances, and as Bill Newman stated, there are already laws in place against this. Whether you're Donald Trump or the poorest person in Northampton, you can be charged with harassment. Let's see. Ms. Carney herself wanted to take a reasoned scientific approach. Let's survey 400 random Northamptonites, no matter whether they're low income or the wealthiest person here, and see what they have to say about public safety and panhandling. In terms of national statistics, homeless and poor people are some of the most nonviolent people there are. Homeless people are much more likely to be victims of violence, whereas middle and upper class people are 20 times more likely to be attacked from someone in their class. That being, especially in the case of domestic violence. There are already laws against this, as Bill Newman pointed out: harassment, fraud, larceny by fraud, trespassing, and sidewalk obstruction. Paul Spector, your colleague himself, when we spoke to us, admitted that this was not a public safety issue. No one's decriminalizing anything when you fine poor people $50 for the first offense and up to $300. The default could mean incarceration. In fact, you make it worse because
30 seconds.
Oh, wow. All right. You say that they changed it to Solicitation Ordinance. I feel like we still know who the target is. The charities here can register, or even if they can't, they have venues besides this to fundraise, not just the street. The panhandlers only have the street. This is obviously still targeting panhandlers. Chief Sienkiewicz has been quoted in many publications as saying that this only targets 21% of the city. But that's the vital 21% where foot traffic is heavy and panhandling is viable. We've looked at the map, and the map just doesn't match the language of the legislation. I'm not going to go over all of the restrictions again. I think you have it in front of you. So even when we walked the map, we found that a lot of the permissible spaces were bike locks or trees they were dominated by. The mayor says the elderly are afraid, but how many of the elderly are themselves panhandlers or poor? With Social Security and 401k in these times, with fixed incomes in this economic downturn, do only the wealthy elderly have the right to safety, or do the poor elderly have a right to enough space so they can compensate for underfunded social services? And when I spoke about the underfunding of social services, the incredible underfunding of social services, even social service workers who are for the ordinance totally agreed with me. And be able to eat, clothe themselves, etc. What about poor women? There's no longer an emergency thing for housing for women who are pregnant and homeless. What about the right to people to have public safety? This is my last sentence. Okay. What about the right of everyone to have public safety, of poor people to have public safety, so they won't starve and become malnourished, so they won't become malnourished enough to, which will exacerbate and contribute to their death from exposure. Fred Contrada wrote that when he looked up deaths from exposure in Northampton, he found thousands of ghosts, not thousands, but hundreds of ghosts climbing up from over the years. We've already had someone die from exposure this year. If you make panhandling that much more onerous, how much more deaths will we have like this? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, could we hear please from Rachel Hanna?
Hi, my name's Rachel Hanna. I am a business owner and homeowner in this town, and pretty much everything that I've wanted to say about my concerns regarding this ordinance have already been said. So I will just be really brief and say that I also am a member of the Chamber of Commerce, and when I first heard about this ordinance, it was very upsetting to me, and my concern about it has led me to go around and talk to different business owners in this town who are also opposed to this ordinance or have concerns about it. And I've collected 18 signatures from business owners, many on Main Street and some on side streets, who are opposed to this ordinance. I'll give this to you. And then I just wanted to say one thing about the petition that was put out by the chamber. A few weeks ago, I went into the cleaners to bring in some cleaning, and I saw their petition there. And I asked the woman if she's looked at the ordinance, if she's read the ordinance, and she hadn't. And she had maybe 120 signatures on that petition. And I said, "Oh, has anyone on this anyone who signed this petition read the ordinance?" And she said, "No." I said, "Do you have a copy of the ordinance?" And she said, "No, but it's put out by the chamber, so I trust it." And that's, I mean, I'm a member of the chamber, so of course I have a lot of respect for the chamber. But that's a concern to me, that they basically are soliciting signatures for something that people haven't read about. So people are supporting something that they haven't read. Every single person, every single business that has signed my petition has read the ordinance. And you know, you might say, well, that kind of thing happens. People sign things all the time. And my question is, does it make it right? Thank you.
Thank you. And could we hear please from Pam Hanna?
Could you check to see if Dave Botter's on the list?
I see Dave Byer right after your name.
Okay, great. Okay, great. My name's Pam Hanna. I am a homeowner in Northampton, and I stand in opposition to this ordinance. Most of the points that I wanted to make have already been made, but I have just a couple of questions that I'd like the council to consider. Talk about fraudulent panhandling, and I want to know how that's going to be how you're going to prove that and how the police officers are going to discern who is a fraudulent panhandler. For instance, I could be out panhandling and be wearing the warmest coat I have, which is an Army coat. I'm not a veteran, but it could be perceived that I'm a veteran because of the clothing that I'm wearing. So does that mean that myself and other people are going to be subject to search and seizure to document whether or not we're part of the armed services? How are we going to discern that? Plus, what if I'm asking for money so that I can buy a sandwich, and then actually I have extra money left over, and so I decide, wow, I'm going to buy a bottle of water, or I'm going to buy a bottle of alcohol. Does it really matter, when we're really sort of getting to those nitty-gritties? So I'd like people to consider that. The second thing is the police department is saying that they need tools. And Chief, I say, why don't you come back and ask actually for more money so that you can have someone walking the streets. I think everybody is concerned for public safety. So why don't you have someone who's on the streets, who knows who's out here, and who can talk to people and build relationships? That would be my definition of living in a community where there is a police force who, and I have to say, I don't know you and I don't know the police officers, but the interactions that I've had with them, you make me uncomfortable. And I don't want to interact with you, So are we going to pass an ordinance based on my comfort level? No, probably not, right? So be out on the streets, building relationships with people, and for people who, another speaker mentioned that they saw someone and they asked them questions about the Veterans Association and they knew that they were fraudulent. Well, call the police. The number's 911. Call the police, right? It's not such a huge deal to do that if you're encountering that. We don't need to create a new law just for the sake of creating a new law. And the third thing that I'd like to just point out is that, it sounds like, Teri Anderson, you said that there's been a collaborative committee of social service organizations, the Chamber of Commerce, Friends of the Homeless, homeless advocates, the police, and the mayor. Where are poor people? Do you have poor people in leadership roles of your organization? Nothing about us without us. Nothing about us without us.
Could we hear from Dave Byer, please?
Yes. Thank you. David Byer. I'm going to be speaking on behalf of Poverty is Not a Crime. I want to talk more about the Business Improvement District proposal, specifically about this document that I got my hands on. They went around to all the residents of the Business Improvement District area, and as I said, solicited, and for some aggressively solicited, them to sign this little petition about the Business Improvement District in Northampton. And if I look on one of the first pages, I see that one of the main goals of it is to reduce panhandling and increase police patrols. And so it makes me wonder I understand there are valid concerns on both sides, but who is really pushing this ordinance, and what motives do they have? This was put out by the Downtown Steering Committee 2 months ago, so the ordinance was already in the works, and part of the Business Improvement District is that we pass this ordinance. It says it right in here. I could read directly from here. Enforcement and regulatory approaches to reduce panhandling. Later in the document, it refers specifically to ordinances. So I really feel like this has been a behind-the-scenes agreement to sort of plug this ordinance. But where is, as she said, where have the poor been in this process? And honestly, from what I see, they have been nowhere, and that really bothers me. This is part of a growing trend in Northampton called gentrification, and I can't remember who it was, but someone was talking about it. In fact, they're one of the people that wrote this, that gentrification is about increasing property values. And what an important part of the dictionary definition, at least from all the dictionaries I've read that was excluded, was often pushing the poor out of their homes, out of the streets, so that wealthier people can inhabit those spaces. Gentrification, which is what this is about, really, and I think what the anti-panhandling ordinance is about, is violent in that you are raising property values, yes, which sounds like a good thing on paper, but whenever you have people whose ability to remain in a house depends on the rent being low, that's not a good thing. And it's not a good thing whenever we try to clean up our streets. It's not a good thing whenever we have a program called Ending Homelessness, called All Roads Lead Home, which on page 26 talks about host towns for low-income developments. What's wrong with having low-income developments where there are low-income people? Why do we need to relocate them to new cities? I mean, it makes me question what sort of this downtown steering committee, what their motives are. And from what I see, it's the motive of profit. And we really face a choice as a community now. Because, I mean, this is going on. They're trying to push the poor out of Northampton, really is, I think, the baseline of what this is about. And we can either create a community where the way we solve problems is through creating penalties which people can't pay, through using police patrol to try to cover up poverty, or we can create a community where instead of hiding need, instead of relocating people forcibly, we decide the biggest part of economic development is making sure needs are met. And the most important needs to meet are food, our shelter, are being treated like a human being. And social services in this town do not provide those three things adequately. And so to talk about economic development is something where we have to spend $35,000 from the city council, almost $1 million from the business improvement district on marketing for this, the PR campaign that's needed to sustain a plan that's to gentrify Northampton. I'm wondering, where should that money really be going? And I think where it should be going is to provide food, shelter, and freedom to anyone who does not have it and anyone who needs it. Thank you. And, sorry, this isn't anything I have to say. I have a petition of 270 people. We handed out the ordinance with them, but some of the people who signed this petition already had familiarity with it. But yeah, this is 270 residents who are against the ordinance.
Thank you. Can we hear from Audrey Hess, please?
Thank you. I'm Audrey Hess. I live on Masonic Street in Northampton. I've been impressed and frequently moved by the compelling statements of previous speakers, both here and at city council meetings over the past few months. I have little new to add to what they've had to say. What I feel I can contribute to the conversation is my own experience of over 26 years as a downtown shopper. According to some speakers here and an article in the Gazette from Friday, October 17th, quote, business owners are responding to complaints from their customers, and as a customer, I would like to try to counter this argument. I am a long-time, frequent, and loyal customer of downtown businesses, and as an older woman, I think I might be representative of many downtown shoppers. I go out of my way, sometimes literally, to support locally owned businesses and encourage others to do the same. I've lived in Northampton since 1982, and for the past 11 years in the downtown on Masonic Street. I'm on Main Street a lot, either for appointments, meetings, meeting friends for breakfast or lunch, or, as I've said, shopping, so I am not unfamiliar with panhandling. In the 26 years that I have lived here, I have never, let me repeat, never, experienced aggressive or threatening behavior from a panhandler. If I'm asked for money and I say no, I get one of three responses, either silence or, more often, have a nice day or God bless you. None of these responses do I find threatening or aggressive. People talk about solving the problem of panhandling. The problem is not panhandling, the problem is poverty, and the panhandlers are the victims. They are also our neighbors, and they are poor, hungry, and cold. Whatever happened to our sense of community? Where is our compassion? This is not the Northampton I know and love. Please reject this mean-spirited ordinance. Thank you.
Can we hear, please, from Diane Welter?
I won't be nearly as eloquent as Marjorie, but thank you all for your efforts on this issue. I just wanted to let you know as well that I've been lived in and shopped in Northampton for 30 years, and I've never been solicited aggressively as defined in the proposed ordinance, or even unpleasantly. Many aspects of the proposed ordinance seem impossible to enforce. Some seem to present risk of legal action against the city, which could cost a lot of money. The time and energy our city officials are spending on looking for solutions to the causes of solicitation is great. Thank you very much. If we have citizens or visitors who find it necessary to stand on the sidewalk asking for money, we should continue to listen. I can't support this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Could we hear, please, from Ira McKinney?
Yes. My name is Ira McKinley, and I'm tripping over the rug. I am, too, a member of Poverty is Not a Crime. But I'm here on a different case here. I was the only homeless person that was at this All Roads Lead home that they had at the over in I can't even think of the name now. Well, it was in Holyoke at the community college. I was the only homeless representative at that place. This led me, because I was living in a shelter at that time, to become a homeless advocate. You know, they were talking about this collaborative thing that they have here, and I've never been asked as a homeless advocate to even participate in that. You know, at this point in time, I've had shows, and I'm working with NCTV, and I've done a show with Thorns Market for Best Buddies, where it was Jackson and Connors that they did a show for the people with Down syndrome, which is on TV right now. We also did a show with Bill Dwight for Shelter Sunday. I helped produce it. I helped direct it. You know, I helped edit it. I lived in a tent for 5 weeks. And I know how it is to be cold and hungry and feeling like nobody cares about you, you know. That gave me the point that I needed to do something about it, to show what homeless people can do. So we did a Pulaski Park event. And now, no time, at that 8-hour period that we showed that we had visual arts, we had a fashion show using homeless and unemployed, was any police presence there. And no arrests were made. Nobody got violent. Nobody did anything of the sort. Everybody had an enjoyable day. Right now, I'm about to solicit. I'm about to panhandle, whatever you want to call it, because I have a show that's going on here at Academy of Music this Saturday, and I need help. I need help, and it's for the youth. It's called Bands United for the Voices of the Oppressed. We need to come up with $1,000 so the youth can go up there and perform their own show too, you know. My thing is that, you know, I don't want a handout. You know, I want you guys to help support me and the youth and other people that's in need. So we can start our own arts and industry building up here, where these people can learn how to do plumbing, carpentry, electrical work, and also some other things that can be trained. So some of these things that you have going on right now, like downtown, the downtown thing here, the building of the police station, and the Ford County Fairground, these people can go out there and bid if they have the right training. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm asking for help. You know, we don't want you to give us handouts. You know, at no time when I was in the tent or any place else have I panhandled. I never had. You know, I didn't feel like I have to. Okay, because I'm a vet. But I do need help to bring the show off, which is going to be on November 29th with Bill Dwight and a couple other people. I have some flyers here if you guys would like to see it. And I'll pass it around.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Thank you. Okay, could we hear, please, from Arturo Castillon?
My name is Arturo Castillon. I'm a member of Poverty is Not a Crime. I just want to really talk about the broader issues that some people aren't really taking into account when we talk about public safety and the ramifications of the way that is implemented and dealt with. We're talking here tonight in the midst of like a huge economic collapse that is every day swelling the ranks of the poor. And I mention this because if we're going to talk about the social effects of crime, we can't neglect the repercussions of poverty that have exacerbated them. And if we do this, if we do neglect that, we're going to create a dialogue that is enforced, that criminalizes the poor, and that it doesn't it basically just upholds the profit margins of the business elite, because the poor don't really have a say in the dialogue. So, if you're going to do this, like, what you're doing is you're neglecting the systematic relationship between poverty and what is defined as crime. And, it seems controversial for some people, but especially in the United States, of all nations, it has an insane amount of people in prison, poor people. It's hard to argue that there isn't anything but a relationship, between the two, and a relationship of acculturation. It's not a mutual relationship. So, we see this as extending beyond the traditional barrios and ghettos into a more rural and suburban community such as Northampton now. And either through forced removal or containment, the process is still the same. The business interests and the police marginalize the poor from the creation and implementation of what is known as public safety. But public safety, which is defined in the official discourse as the improvement of the profitability of capitalism, always results in the marginalization of the poor. When poor people are overwhelmingly persecuted by the police, thrown behind bars, robbed of their money, marginalized from their supposed community, nothing really else can take place except for, increased police repression that ends up in the interests of the wealthy. And if the public wants to protect itself from what is defined as crime, it must strive to prevent it. So that the first thing we need to do is fight poverty, not increase the presence of an armed force that will further criminalize the poor. That which the official discourse defines as crime is constructed to be understood as a threat to the public safety, as if those who are labeled as criminals by the powerful weren't part of the community. Instead, we are excluded from the decision-making process that controls our lives, not allowed to the necessary resources and the space to challenge the conditions which reproduce this crime. So the official discourse, between poverty and crime makes it so that people that are poor are more likely to commit crimes, as if it were like a voluntary choice, as if it were like an individual type of thing, instead of ignoring the systemic relationship that has a direct correlation between crime and poverty.
About 30 seconds.
So, the rising levels of poverty should not alarm those engaged in efforts. They should alarm those engaged in efforts to reduce crime. We are forced to be more innovative and want to be more effectively in dealing with the causes of poverty and crime. The relationship between the two can expect to be faced, must be faced with in a way that is going to fight poverty in order to improve public safety. And if the public is to be made safe, it needs to empower itself by establishing satisfying employment and economic support systems. Ironically, as the numbers of those living in poverty continue to increase, so has the number of those who have become wealthy. If we want to prevent crime, bridges need to be formed between those who are impoverished with meager resources and those who possess an excess of resources gained at the expense of the poor. Those who are interested in addressing this issue should adopt the attitude of helping to create economic conditions necessary for the poor to be able to fish, instead of relying on some fish sandwiches that are passed out from time to time. All of society benefits when those at the bottom get the opportunity to establish or regain dignity by elevating themselves from poverty towards lives characterized by work and self-fulfillment.
Could we hear, please, from John Cohen? Is John here, please? Oh,
Yep.
thank you.
I live on Perkins. I'm not a longtime resident of Northampton. I've only been here 3 years. And I've never been impressed in the time I've lived here by any kind of badgering on the streets. I've never been accosted in any way. And the only time I feel uncomfortable when someone asks for a donation is when I'm cheap. And then I feel guilty, right? So I don't support this. I think Northampton would be impoverished itself if we drove street people off the streets. Thanks.
Thank you. Could we hear, please, from Jenna Sujat? Did I pronounce that correctly?
You did pretty good.
Thank you.
It's Jenna Sujat, and I am a homeowner in Northampton. I've lived here for 12 years, and I've worked downtown for 6, and I own a business downtown now for 3 years. In all the talk about the ordinance, I recently noticed that the city has posted no soliciting signs in the parking garage, and I asked myself why that might be the case. And I figured it's because the city wants people to feel comfortable and safe when they're parking there, when it's dark at night and they're all alone, when they're pulling out their wallets to pay the machines. They want people to use the garage. And I'm thinking, why not apply the same logic to the rest of downtown? Apparently, this is the idea behind the ordinance. It does not make poverty a crime. It does not say that solicitation is second-class speech. The people who live and work and shop downtown, such as myself and my friends and other business owners I know, who support the ordinance, want people who are poor to get the support they need in terms of food, shelter, and handouts as well. My business donates to the shelter and the food bank, as do most of the businesses I know. That's why we paid for the Happy Frog to be installed. I know some of this crowd laughs at it, but I understand that it has been receiving $250 a week, and that's a lot of money. We also want people who live and work and shop downtown to feel comfortable doing so. I think this ordinance makes sense. It eliminates aggressive panhandling, and I don't see who can argue with that part of it. It eliminates fraudulent panhandling, and it is certainly not okay to pretend to be homeless and take money that could be going to someone who's truly in need, and I don't see who can argue with that. It keeps people on the bricks and allows for a safe corridor of passage on the sidewalk. The bricks are only, 1 inch over. So I don't see what the problem is with that. I think it makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Could we hear, please, from Jim Neal?
Yes, I'm Jim Neal. I've been a resident on and off here for 30 years or more, and I live and work downtown. And I know a lot of the business owners, and I wouldn't classify any of them as elite, really. I don't know if there's such an us and them situation here in Northampton as some people perceive it. I don't know anybody who's really in a situation where they feel like they're necessarily thriving. The businesses downtown are trying to stay in business too, and you'll notice a lot of them close down because they don't. So I understand why the businesses, of course, would try to find a situation where the people that act like idiots downtown, as opposed to those that are sort of use common sense and human courtesy, are addressed. And sometimes, I don't know if it's necessarily just the panhandlers, but there are people who will stay on a bench for hours and hours and hours, which I suppose is fine, but if people want to sit on that bench, they don't have a chance to. And just to walk around downtown and not be hassled is, I think, is a right. And I don't think any of the things that are being put forth in the ordinance take that away. And this is not a trial for poverty. I mean, I don't like poverty either, but this is not about that. And a lot of people here have been speaking about issues that go far beyond what this ordinance is addressing. Thank you.
Thank you. Could we hear, please, from Susan Stinson?
I'm Susan Stinson. I live at 163 Bridge Street, Ward 3. And the complicated and extensive restrictions on where and when soliciting is allowed would be very difficult for a person asking for money on the street to be aware of and follow to the letter. Using a system of increasing fines to enforce an ordinance that has direct impact on our most economically vulnerable citizens means that most of those fines will either go unpaid or that the payment will cause unreasonable suffering among people who may not be able to afford housing or food. And most of the provisions of this ordinance, such as solicitation from a park bench, don't seem to me to be about public safety at all. The vitality of Northampton's businesses is important to all of us, but protecting the First Amendment rights of all the people who use our streets and sidewalks is fundamental to the values we share as a community. Putting economic interests before civil rights is tempting for many reasons, especially in times of economic chaos, but the potential for damage is just too great. Please don't support this ordinance.
Could we hear from Claudio Guerra? Is Claudio here? Okay. If he comes back, we'll bring him up, but could in the meantime we hear from Anna Abel? I don't know if I pronounced that correctly.
Pretty close.
I'm Anna Obley. I have a business here in town, and I'm very against this ordinance. I'm very disturbed by, in a time of need, our community getting together and deciding to financially punish those of us who have the least finances. I think a number of people have said that this is attempting to even out the balance, making all solicitors created equal. But really, the Democratic National Committee has $50 to spare for a fine, and the person who's panhandling because they're starving does not. This is not equalizing things. This is putting a common financial burden on people who do not have common financial resources. This is tempting in times when things are getting tighter. My business is getting smaller, things are getting tighter, it's getting more difficult to put that on people who can't speak for themselves or aren't given the opportunity to speak for themselves. And I think we just very much need to not give in to this temptation. Please, please don't pass this ordinance.
Thank you. Could we hear, please, from Andrew Fleming? Is Andrew here? If not, then that's the last person on my list. I would ask if there's anyone else present who's still, and I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hands. So I'll ask if you'll state your name and address, please. I'll ask the person in the front, and then we'll go to the left and then the right, and so that we can make sure we have your name correctly stated for the record.
How y'all doing? My name is Jacob Farr.
Sorry, could you say that again, please?
I'm sorry, I'm a bit hoarse from just before. My name is Jacob Farr. I live at 893 West Street, Amherst. I want to address two things here. The first is that there are members of the business community who have expressed that that there is a financial concern and economic concern for the passage of the bill, that it protects high property values in Northampton. But I think that because of Northampton's reputation, I think that there's a far greater economic concern in regards to the bill, the ordinance not being passed, that Northampton thrives off of its reputation as being a city that is concerned about social awareness and concern for all members of society, all races, all classes, all genders, and so forth. And there's a potential that there are far more people who would be turned away from the city should measures like this continue to go forth, especially in cognizance of recent measures, as expressed by the people before me. The other thing is that there's the police community here has expressed that that the force behind the passage of this ordinance is public safety. It's very important to recognize that the function of police is about quite a bit more than just public safety. It's protection of property, and it's social control. And I think it's very important to recognize that what this is in fact doing is attempting to control a specific class in society, and moreover a class that has very few roots for advocacy for itself, and in all the measures that have been taken from the top down. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. I saw 2 hands over on the left, and I'd ask them one at a time, please, to come up, and then I'll go to the right. And please state your name clearly so we can jot it down.
Hi, my name is Jenna Wickler. I live at 25 New South Street, which is in the Business Improvement District, and I just have a few words to say. First of all, I've spent a lot of time downtown. I've never been aggressively panhandled. I hula hoop in the park like late at night on the weekends, and I know homeless people personally. And there are a lot of people who really fall through the cracks. There are people I personally know who can, for one reason or another, not live in the shelters and they don't get the meals. And so this, when people claim that we have services, or we used to give your money to charity so that they don't spend it on drugs or whatever, it's not filling the need. And I think people have the right to be able to ask for whatever they want. And I don't really have a problem saying no to somebody. I think if you have a problem saying no to somebody to ask you for money, then you need to get some balls. And that's all I have to say about that. But also, I took huge offense when I think it was this man from the Hampshire Property Management Group. Somebody gave my cell phone number to this organization to start cold calling me. And I really resent my privacy being violated, and I don't like being called on the phone. And, I'm being asked to sign this petition that you guys are sending around. And that was more aggressive soliciting than I've ever gotten from anybody on the street. And I don't know. I think if you're intimidated by the people on the street, get to know them. And that's the easiest way. Just become their friend. And then you don't have to be scared. So, that's it.
Thank you. The other person on the left, please.
Hello, my name is Twyla Reardon, and I spend...
Sorry, could you say it again?
Twyla Reardon.
Thank you.
And I spend a lot of time in Northampton. I spend a lot of time downtown. I know a lot of people that are street musicians, and I have made friends with people who are homeless and people who just simply like to be out on the street, seeing people that they know, people that have lived in Northampton all their life. I had the privilege of meeting a lot of people that are young and that have lived in Northampton all their lives this summer. And I find myself in this meeting and wondering, is this really a public safety issue? Or are you using perhaps an excuse of aggression to place people under a guise of solicitors into pre-selected areas? And it's whether these people be homeless or street musicians or artists, by designating particular places where people can conduct their business. When people may question whether or not panhandling is a legitimate business, I don't know myself. But certainly there are public places where citizens ought to be able to gather. And I have witnessed a lot of conflict pointed towards people who are not even panhandling on public streets of Northampton, where they're just simply being. And so is this really about where we can be and converse in public? I certainly understand when people are in the middle of the street and blocking traffic, pedestrian traffic, that has to change. And as someone there, I make a point of reminding people to be not in the middle of the sidewalk, especially younger people that are there. And those are things that people just need to be aware of as common courtesy. I'm not sure that can really be legislated. But I think that this all adds to the vitality of Northampton and how Northampton is known as an art community. And I hope we do not lose that.
Thank you, Father. And then I saw 2 more hands on this side here. I'll take them one at a time, please.
Hi, my name is Joe Blumenthal. I own a music store on Pleasant Street, downtown Sounds. I've been doing business in Northampton for over 30 years. There have been so many things said here tonight that I consider, I could take a half an hour trying to rebut everything I disagreed with, but I'll try and restrict myself to the subject that's actually at hand. Before I get to my main point, I will tell you that during my frequent walking around downtown, I for one have observed aggressive panhandling that I think has made people very uncomfortable. It is something that does exist. I also want to say that I'm a member of the American Civil Liberties Union and value very highly the constitutional right of free speech, and don't look at this as a free speech issue. What we have here is a question of conflicting rights, and that is there are people who want to be on the street, who feel they and who do, in fact, have a right to talk to passersby and ask them for money. But there's also many people who work downtown and who want to do business, who have the right to have their customers be able to walk into their stores. And there are customers who are walking around on the streets of Northampton who have the right not to be interfered with as they walk around. And we live in a very complicated society with a very large government that, as Judith so eloquently said some time ago, passes numerous regulations. And the way that we deal with conflicting rights in a complicated society is that we pass regulations that help people to get along with each other. And in my opinion, one of the strongest arguments for this ordinance is that while we've had laws on the books that potentially could deal with these things for so long, I believe it's been the position of the police chief that he has not, that these laws are problematic in their enforcement. And so he has tried, and everybody else on this committee has tried to come up with ways that we can give the police a tool to properly regulate the sidewalks so that everybody who is on the sidewalks, who has rights on the sidewalks, can have those rights be respected. And for that reason, I urge the City Council to seriously consider the ordinance. Perhaps it needs to be amended a little bit as if Mr. Newman comes up with something that people feel is agreeable. But I think this is a real opportunity for us to find a good balance between the conflicting rights of people who want to solicit for money or for something, customers who want to wander freely around the town, and shop owners who are trying to make a living. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there one more hand over here?
Good evening. My name is Rachel Rybacek. I live in the Green Street neighborhood area, and I've lived in Northampton for coming up on 13 years. And during those 13 years, have frequented downtown Northampton probably every day, sometimes multiple times a day. And I actually grew up in Miami, a city with much more diversity and economic insecurity amongst a huge population, and have a lot of experience seeing homelessness and poverty in Technicolor, which I'm deeply disturbed that people in Northampton find what we have on our streets so terrifying or offensive. It's shocking to me, frankly, and I think this has been blown out of proportion significantly. I'm also deeply disturbed that grown adults are needing an ordinance to help them negotiate the day-to-day interactions they have walking down the street. I think that we need much more awareness around an individual's capacity to say no, stand up for themselves if they feel they need to, and continue on with their business. I do not think that we need more intervention by the police in how we deal with each other on a day-to-day basis in the community we live in. And other people have said this, there is a way to communicate with individuals who are asking for money by saying no and continuing to walk away. And something else that's very disturbing about this is much of this is resting solely on anecdotal evidence. There has not been a comprehensive and exhaustive statistical survey showing us some horrific ratio of aggressive panhandling incidents relative to how many people live here and frequent downtown on a daily basis. It is absolutely irresponsible to pass an ordinance that will bring more police presence or force into our community unnecessarily. I think that what we need is a call for individuals who are adults to learn how to negotiate and navigate their daily interactions more effectively, and not to hide behind these structures, this ordinance, because this is much, much more a situation, a problem based on perception, on miscommunication. specifically when we're looking at this petition being signed by people who have not even been presented with the ordinance. I mean, it's just scientifically, professionally, this is a mess. And so I cannot support this ordinance, and I am urging people who are in a position of power to not support this ordinance, but rather look for solutions that are much more effective in dealing with this perceived problem and people's fear, which I think is unfounded, because I've done some of my own anecdotal survey taking with my friends who have small children. My friend's 8-year-old daughter today said she's not at all intimidated or afraid by people on the street asking for money. I've had some of these guys walk after me when I've said no to their request for money, and I just tell them to leave me the fuck alone. So, like, it's really that simple, and I'm very, very concerned about the direction this could take us in as a community. And frankly, I'd rather see an ordinance against, like, the many baby strollers that block my capacity to get in and out of the Haymarket to get a cup of coffee. I mean, is that the direction we want to go in? Or that there are so many tourists from Connecticut who have no idea where they're going, block the sidewalk with, like, their, you know, loads of kids getting out of their SUV. Like, great, they're good for the economy, but they're not good for my trying to get through my day of, you know, living and working in the city. So I think it's a little ridiculous when we put it in those terms. And frankly, I think the same could be said for trying to pass an ordinance against people who are on the street for whatever reason asking for money. I get to use my discretion as to whether or not I will give them my money. And that's my right. And I extend that to everyone. Thank you.
And I see one more hand in the back. Thank you. And one more hand on the side.
Lila Denberg, 893 West Amherst Street,
Sorry,
Amherst.
could you say your last name again?
Denberg. Lila Denberg. This is very brief and general, but I feel it's completely necessary to look at. I ask all of us to look at our lives for just a moment. Aren't we so lucky that we can call Northampton home? Let's for a moment stop thinking of Northampton as a town for mainly middle and upper middle class tourists and citizens to shop in stores that they are so blessed to be able to spend money in without severe economic hesitation. And let's look at Northampton as a home for all people, for those who do not have a home necessarily, for those who have had trouble in their lives that the high majority of us in this room will never experience. We need to think of Northampton as a community for humans living with other humans, not wealthy business owners helping wealthy consumers and customers. How can we ever expect to have peace of any scale when classism is so deeply ingrained and integrated in our society? It is not a right of business owners to force those who do not have enough money to buy food for the week to leave the area. This ordinance does not seek to provide aid to the poor. It seeks to throw them in jail cells and blind everyone else from the poverty that exists in this town and all other towns and provinces in the world. This ordinance demands money from the poor who are asking for money. How can anyone think that this is a successful way to deal with panhandling and soliciting? Or does this ordinance not care at all about any successful humanistic values, but rather a rapid way to discard Northampton of the poor? This ordinance desires to make lives easier, to make easier the lives of those who already have it easy, and to worsen the lives of the poor. I ask you to look at the fortunes that have gotten you here and not to base your discomforts on your privileges. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I am Jack Finn. I have a business on King Street, and I also live on King Street. And I'm in favor of this ordinance. And what I'd like to do is propose that people that are panhandling should be in favor of this ordinance. Because really what it does is it's limiting aggressive panhandling. And if you are a panhandler, you actually are engaged in commerce. And commerce that we do in our store has to be friendly to the customer. So I would submit to you that if you had this ordinance in place, it would be protecting panhandlers that are sensitive to their customers. People that come here are going to be able to be customers for our stores and also for people that are soliciting money for whatever reason. So if there is orderly commerce, more people are going to come to the city, more people are going to be available to panhandlers to solicit, and more customers are going to be coming to my business. So I think right regulation, ordering the commerce in the city is going to benefit not just the business owner, myself, but it's also going to help everybody that's soliciting money, that needs a handout. If we can encourage traffic, encourage commerce, it's good for everybody. So I urge passage of this ordinance.
Thank you. And I believe that was all that I saw that wished to speak tonight. Okay, in which case I'll ask if there is a motion to close the public hearing. Moved and seconded, all in. Oh, I'm sorry, we had one more. You just made it. State your name and address, please.
Andrea Fox, 110 Prospect Street, Northampton, Mass. I want to thank you all for sneaking me in under the wire, and I'm sorry I missed everybody's testimony. I was just coming from Worcester from work, and I just want to make a quick statement and say that I'm really opposed to this ordinance, and I wanted to share my opinion on that because I feel like there's a lot that I'm sure has been said already, and I've been following this as it's been unfolding, and I know people have been taking the perspective that it's a public safety issue. People take the perspective of a number of angles, and I just simply want to say that I have a 6-year-old son. I live here. We're in town every day just about. We walk through the streets. I think that the panhandling and people approaching us is an inconvenience. It's not something I'm necessarily happy about on occasion, but I've seen both sides of it, and I don't feel unsafe when I walk through town. I shop in town. I buy local. I know a lot of the people who sell things to us, and I also feel like it's a really important opportunity for me and my son when we walk through the streets to just understand that there are people who have less than us. And just this past week, we were coming through town, and there was a woman who was selling scarves to help feed herself that day, and we purchased one of those scarves, and it was a really good way that my son and I had to open up discussion about what does it mean to be someone who has and someone who does not have. And I know that there's a lot to say about this issue, and I'm sure you've heard it all, but I appreciate the opportunity to simply share that I am opposed to the ordinance. I feel as if people really need the opportunity to take care of themselves in the way that they can, and if it means that they have to ask for money, it's an unfortunate way to go about doing it, but yet it's protected as far as I know. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, well, and I think I heard a second. That moved and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Anybody else? Okay, that motion passes. So now I'll ask then for the rest of the committee, where would you like to go from here? We've heard the public comment, we've heard from the proponents and from Attorney Newman and from the public, and I'll open it up to the rest of the committee.
I have a lot of questions. And I guess some of it, someone made the distinction earlier, and I think it's first of all, thank you everyone for coming. And I think the distinction that someone made earlier about there's the public policy part of this, that was our good solicitor, the public policy piece and the constitutional piece. And I have a lot of questions and concerns on both of those points. First, as the policy maker, as someone who's being asked to implement a public policy, we need to be able to demonstrate that there's a really compelling need for a policy. And it would be helpful to have some data around that. And I wondered, Chief, if in your researching this and compiling the information that you needed to put together the ordinance, do you have like statistics on calls that you receive around this issue, or calls that you receive from business owners, or is there any kind of data around it? Because that's the piece that I haven't heard a whole lot of. I hear a lot of anecdotal evidence, and we've heard anecdotal evidence in both directions tonight, but I think the concern is, do we legislate by anecdote, or do we legislate by real data? So I guess the question I have is, you're saying that this is a tool that you need, and I guess I'm wondering what kind of data you have that says that there's this problem, the tools we have aren't working, and that's why we need this tool, this additional tool as you've described it.
Well, I hadn't been asked to develop any data for tonight's meeting.
Okay.
I can tell you, going back through my file in 2003, we analyzed over a six-month period of time, out of the literally hundreds of calls in the immediate downtown area. There were dozens identified as relevant to people complaining about confrontations. Again, trying to weed out whether it's a panhandling, whether it's an assault, whether it's two parties that know each other. Those are our data won't. We can't peel the onion that far away down to find out those things. And then I recall in August of this year, we did about a 2-month analysis at the request of the Chamber of Commerce, and we had about 25 pages of calls downtown, usually about 12 or so per page, that involve city ordinance violations, suspicious activities, disturbances, all those things. But being able to mine the data specifically to the very question that you're asking, that it's directly related to the
Solicitation Act.
Right. It all depends how the caller calls it in. Suspicious activity because someone looking at somebody, or they were approached, or they were aggressive, or whatever. We can certainly try to do that, but it's going to take a great deal of, and we can do it. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but but to mine down to the actual cause of effects, which is again a lot of the interpretation of the people that are calling. So.
Now, on the other issues, that there seems to be this distinction that's being made between the criminal statutes, and Attorney Newman has suggested we should really try to tailor the language to match the criminal statutes more closely if you were going to go in that direction, any civil infractions. Do you have data on, I guess the question is what is the concern about trying to enforce those existing laws? We've heard a lot about that in the public comment session. I mean, when I hear the director of veteran services in the city say that he was fraudulently solicited for a veteran's donation, I'm thinking, what more of a slam dunk case would you have for fraud,
well,
or
because
larceny by fraud? Than
larceny was never executed and therefore not prosecutable.
Okay, so if Steve had given money,
misrepresenting himself under the ordinance before the larceny is actually executed, they then become subject to the ordinance.
Okay.
Which, again, enforcement's step 3. The deterrence is step 2, and that's
existing laws.
He wouldn't be able to be prosecuted under this fact pattern that Steve gave us.
He would not have been prosecutable.
No.
What if Steve had given money to him, and then reported it to you and said there's someone downtown who's purporting to be representing a veterans agency, and I know that person for a fact is not?
Well, in that case, we'd have to most likely try to find him and identify him, which would be problematic. At the same point, try to determine specifically whether the money is in the possession of the individual and therefore executing the fraudulent.
So how is any of that different under the regime that you're proposing now? Suppose someone comes and says, there's a veteran, there's a person who's got a sign saying, I'm a veteran, please help me, and I have reason to believe they're fraudulently soliciting. How would the new ordinance, how would it change your approach to that sort of a situation? I guess I'm trying to understand the difference.
Proof would be less because the elements of the law that are required under the statutes as they exist as misdemeanors and some felonies, it's a lower level that we have to cross the threshold of. And again, we're not going to jump to enforcement as step 1. If someone is fraudulently or attempting to fraudulently, we can deter them by having them know that there's a strong likelihood that they would receive a $50 citation versus a very unlikely likelihood, if that's a way of saying it, that we would follow through with a timely and lengthy prosecution to bring them to a misdemeanor hearing in court. You know, Attorney Newman has great points, but they're based in theoretical scenarios as opposed to the realistic scenarios and what we face with pursuing criminal complaints at the district court level, which is difficult and problematic.
But I guess I'm still hung up on how do you cross that threshold, albeit you're saying it's a lower threshold, of issuing a ticket to somebody and saying, you're committing fraud, here's your ticket. How is it any easier for the officer to do that than it is to press charges under existing larceny by fraud statute? I'm just trying to figure out how you make that determination, what the
language that we chose is the false or misleading solicitation. It shall be unlawful for any person to knowingly make any false or misleading representation in the course of soliciting a donation. False or misleading representations could reasonably cause a person to act differently from the way he or she otherwise would act and include, but are not limited to the following. And there's a whole list of the
I understand, but it's still, there's that decision that the officer has to make in terms of, I'm going to issue a ticket. So how does that?
Based on the totality of the circumstances,
Okay.
the proof, and the evidence that he may have in front of him. It may mean a verbal warning. If you're caught doing this again, I'm going to go back, we'll follow up, whatever. But they're not executing the larceny, which is the element that's required for the
But
larceny.
I'm asking about the this. How do you determine what the this is? Because that's the part that I'm still unclear about, is how, and I'm trying to just understand this because we're saying that we're going to reclassify this as, and I'm using the fraud by a veteran as a different type class of crime, but I'm still saying you still have to, there's some kind of a threshold that you have to cross to even charge the person by giving them a ticket. So.
Based on the language that we have here.
Okay.
I wish Steve was still here because he has in fact called on some of the fraudulent veterans who he said, I know that person's not a veteran. They're out there. Our officers will go out, speak to them, say you can't keep doing that. You can't keep representing yourself.
So that would be enough reason for you to issue a ticket under that scenario?
We could in that circumstance.
Okay.
Under the same circumstance, a person complying with our request when we have no tool in our toolbox to actually enforce it, the compliance has been good. But if there isn't compliance and they continue to solicit fraudulently, this gives us a tool that we would be able to intercede and not just be a deterrent, but be able to enforce.
I'll yield to other questions.
I just have a follow-up to that question, Chief. It sounds to me from what you just said that the difference is that under the state law, what would be required to be prosecutable would be the actual giving, not just the asking, but actually the giving. That would constitute the larceny. And then in the municipal ordinance that we have before us, the asking in and of itself would be, the soliciting in and of itself would be illegal, and the discretion then is it's at the discretion of the police officer as to whether or not to give a verbal warning or a ticket, as the case may be. I mean, that there's a wide latitude of discretion there.
There is a wide latitude of discretion for the misrepresentation, and we're not advocating any of our officers on a first case scenario to use the enforcement tool.
Okay, so you don't see that there's a duty to enforce, the same duty to enforce that there may exist under the state law?
The state law, again, has more elements that have to be proven because it's a criminal offense versus a decriminalized civil action that we're proposing in this ordinance.
Is there a difference in the duty to enforce?
No, actually not.
Okay.
The Supreme Court, as Attorney Newman will most likely agree, it gives a great deal of discretion to officers in the enforcement of the laws.
Okay. Thank you. Bob?
I don't have any questions at the moment. What I would like to do, we accepted a letter from Patricia Shaughnessy, who's the Director of the Council on Aging, Senior Center Director and ADA Coordinator, and I'd like to read it since I think it was her intent that it actually be read into the record, and since she was not here to do that, I'd like to read it.
Thank you.
I write this letter as both the Director of the Northampton Council on Aging and Senior Center and as the Northampton ADA Coordinator. I request that this letter be a part of the public record as being in support of the proposed ordinance 285-53 soliciting activities. It is always a difficult situation to evaluate and determine how policy, ordinance, or law is to be written when it has a direct effect on some individuals who may be in need of assistance, who may be at risk, or who are the most vulnerable in our community. In working with the elderly and the disabled, we are always striving to provide a support system necessary to meet their basic needs and to enhance their quality of life, which can continue to be achieved by supporting the proposed ordinance 285-53, soliciting activities. And how can this be achieved? By supporting the ordinance. With specific zones or limited areas for soliciting, both elderly and disabled can have direct path of travel that is clear of physical obstruction or verbal obstruction. Entry in and out of buildings can be clear of physical obstruction or verbal obstruction. With specific language regarding false or misleading solicitations, both the elderly and disabled will have a better personal comfort level in determining that a direct contribution or the purchase of goods from a person soliciting can be considered more legitimate and lawful. All types of scams are routinely targeted at the elderly and disabled, and the Soliciting Activities Ordinance can provide some direct protection and reassurance. With specific language relating to the needs of the disabled, the proposed ordinance recognizes that the disabled may need to sit while soliciting. The proposed ordinance offers a clear alternative to members of the disabled community. Thank you for the opportunity to provide public comment on a topic that is very difficult for any community to review, and it's signed by Patricia Shaughnessy, Northampton Council on Aging and Senior Center Director and Northampton ADA Coordinator.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilor Reckman?
Well, it certainly seems to me that we have some work to do to decide if we want this ordinance to move forward. And I guess I would propose that between now and our next meeting, how do we do this with open meeting law? That's
Maybe before we move to the next steps, I'll just ask if are there any other questions? Just other questions of the?
Yeah.
Please.
And this is more moving over to the constitutional side. I'm still having a difficult time understanding how Benefit v. Cambridge, which to me it's the only Supreme Judicial Court ruling I can find in Massachusetts on the issue of essentially peaceable solicitation, which the court sweepingly struck down a state law and went well beyond even the task in front of them. Have there been other communities in Massachusetts that have enacted ordinances or challenged, brought any challenges under Benefit at all? And have any been upheld?
But Benefit doesn't apply because it's a criminal statute and not a civil statute. That's one of the distinctions. It also specifically deals, in my opinion, with peaceful solicitation, which this ordinance does not prohibit. And that's why it's my opinion that this is not a violation of Benefit versus Cambridge. There's also, as you may remember, some of you, from our days when we talked about newspaper boxes, there's a Massachusetts case that says that you are allowed to regulate downtown. I mean, you can take specific areas of the city and enforce regulations so long as they don't violate a person's right to free speech. That's what we've tried to do with this ordinance, is to regulate it so that we're regulating the time, place, and manner which are allowed under the Constitution.
So you're saying that you can regulate so that I can...
Not content. We cannot regulate content.
But so you're saying, though, that if I take something out of a criminal context and move it to a civil context, that's enough to satisfy a constitutional test or challenge?
I'm saying that you asked me why I don't think that Benefit is on point, and I'm saying because there are two distinctions. One is it said that you can't regulate peaceful solicitation.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
This ordinance does not do that.
But it did go on to say you can't regulate it in public spaces, public parks, public benches,
It says you can't regulate.
You can't prohibit it, is what it
You can't
said.
prohibit it, thank you.
Yeah.
May I do a follow-up
Sure.
then too? This is where I'm confused too. I mean, because when I read this ordinance, I'm concerned just because it does pertain to all solicitation. And so any person on any city property, I believe that's also one piece of the ordinance, on any city property is prohibited from engaging in solicitation.
I'm sorry,
There is a clause on city property.
I thought that we took that out.
I don't think it's in there.
Okay, then that may have been the previous version.
That was one of the
Okay.
original.
But otherwise, walking on the sidewalk, a person may not engage in solicitation unless they're on the brick pavers.
I'm sorry, is that a question?
Yes. Okay.
I have a question though about,
Well,
because
and before I just want to clarify that so that it's clear. I think it should be clear that any form of solicitation, as an attempt to remain kind of content neutral, any form of solicitation is prohibited on the sidewalk if it's not on the brick pavers and in those other designated areas. So, and the example is the one Attorney Newman brought up about asking for contributions to the United Way or to the hot chocolate run for Safe Passage or for the Walk to Cure Cancer or for anything else charitable or uncharitable, or even for, $1 for a cup of coffee from your friend. While there's wide latitude on the part of the police as to whether or not it would be enforced, the fact of the matter is it would be included in this ordinance. It would be considered illegal.
I have a question about that because, the difference between having a personal conversation as you're walking down the street with a friend and asking them for a donation to an organization is different, in my mind, from standing on the street asking everyone that goes by for a solicitation for an organization.
But in terms of how we've written this ordinance, does that make a distinction? Is there
I
a
don't think
distinction
it
made
applies,
between
but-
asking a friend?
I don't think it applies. A personal conversation?
We all agree that it doesn't apply. Mr. Newman doesn't agree.
Oh, okay. So in fact, that's helpful
I
to
don't
know.
want to speak for you, Bill, but I think that
That's
you
helpful
just.
to know. I mean, you do see the ordinance as it's presently crafted, as to say that I could walk down on the sidewalk and ask my friend for, $1 for a cup of coffee because I forgot to bring my wallet.
I would say you ought to think about who your friends are. If they're going to turn you into the police because you asked them for
Well,
$1 for a
I'm
cup of coffee.
concerned. I just don't want to be engaging in I mean, we've all taken an oath of office.
I'm sorry. I just think that example is so far out and so absurd that to think that the police would seriously consider that is just not reasonable.
The only reason I ask is not because of my fear that the police might consider it, but just because we may be crafting a law, and those of us who take an oath of office to obey all the laws of the city of Northampton and the Constitution just may feel uncomfortable engaging in something that might, in fact, violate a law that we helped craft.
And I think that what you have to think about is whether a reasonable person would think that was aggressive solicitation.
No, that's not aggressive. I'm just talking about, please,
yeah.
this is include. I'm just asking whether, because as it's been pointed out, we've distinguished in this law between aggressive solicitation and peaceful solicitation. And one is prohibited and one is regulated. Aggressive solicitation is prohibited, and peaceful solicitation is restricted and regulated. Okay. So the peaceful solicitation that we all engage in every day is the question I'm asking. Is the peaceful solicitation that we all engage in every day included in this law? And that's what concerns me. And I'm wondering, I know that Attorney Newman has suggested at least that there are some very obvious charitable solicitation that clearly does fall into that. But I'm also just wondering about the everyday mundane forms of solicitation that we all do every day.
And what's revealing in what you said, Madam Solicitor, is you
Just call me Janet.
Janet, you clearly, you're revealing that this is really not content neutral. I mean, when you make a statement that, well, everybody knows what, that if you're asking for the United Way, well, that's
No, I
clearly
think
not what
that-
this ordinance is aimed at.
I think that it's
No
aimed at a
reasonable
reasonable
person. But that's is that not solicitation?
It does apply to the United Way. I mean, that's why we, on Attorney Newman's recommendation,
That's what
made it
Councilor
apply to all solicitors. My question is, I don't think it applies to a personal conversation. The example that Bill gave in his written testimony was, if I'm walking down the street with my friend and I ask them to, to donate to whatever, that comes under the ordinance, and I don't think that does come under the
If
ordinance.
you and I are coming up the street and I stop you, I say, hey, Terry, guess what? There's this great, fundraiser this weekend. Could you help support it with me? Could you, would that be any less spontaneous than me walking up the street and being asked by a
If you're
stranger?
asking me as a friend, or if you're out there soliciting everyone that goes by, I think that's a different level of solicitation.
Okay.
If you're engaging me as a personal acquaintance,
Okay.
then I think that's very different than if you're soliciting the general public.
Okay.
Is it written that way in our law, though? I mean, in our ordinance, is it such that,
I'd be happy to look at that.
I guess the problem I have is when you,
I think that we can look at that language and see if there's something that we can put in there.
I mean, the first go around, this was clearly it was not content neutral. Now you've attempted to make it content neutral by saying all solicitation is regulated. And so you must do it in a certain area. If it gets aggressive, you can't do it at all. I mean, that's essentially what this boils down to. My question is, and I think it's similar, it's something that Councilor Newman, if you read through his memo, is if really what we're talking about is trying to keep people, if we're trying to keep the sidewalks clear, if it's really not about selective speech that we don't like, if it's not about that, then why not just simply say that anybody who's doing any kind of long-term standing or sitting or whatever should just stay on the bricks and be done with it. That's the end of it. Don't talk about soliciting, don't talk about aggressive soliciting, don't talk about any of that stuff.
But absent a statute or ordinance that the courts will require that was clear and to the point, the defense for the attorney to come in when we charge that person would be Benefit versus Cambridge, and you have no ordinance or other definition of what it is that you're saying they're violating.
But if you call it a ban on, a regulation of solicitation, I'm just talking about.
I understand the
ordinance
of the area that you're having difficulty with, and I think it's an opportunity for us to have a more focused examination of the language, which you already suggested. And again, Attorney Newman's opinion today, after the months of time we spent on this, I only got this just prior to this meeting, so I haven't had a chance to digest it. And I think we would have that opportunity once I get a chance to go through it.
Okay, so you are willing to take a look at some of the.
Absolutely, we're willing to look at the language, and we want to make it right. We want to make it so that it's content neutral. It's not we're not intending to make it so that it's geared toward a certain group of people.
But I'm
It's
saying, can't you make
intended
it-
to be content neutral.
Can't you make it speech? Don't include speech in the equation, because I think that's where you're going to be in trouble. Because by my reading of benefit, and whether you're talking about civil or criminal, peaceful solicitation is protected speech.
I agree.
Period. I mean, I don't know any, and because Colorado has modified that, or the Second Circuit has modified that.
We're in the First Circuit.
We're in the First Circuit. That's the SJC.
Yep.
I don't know how you get around that. So it seems like if we could, if there's a real public policy here about keeping the sidewalks clear, and I get calls from landlords. I represent Ward 4, I represent downtown. I get calls from landlords who are concerned about people blocking entrances, to their buildings, sitting on their stoop, refusing to leave when they're asked politely to just please move so I can go into my house. I understand all of that. My fear is that there's a lot of people who think that this ordinance is going to solve that problem. I really don't think it's going to solve that problem. This ordinance, I think if you got rid of all the people who are making people uncomfortable by asking for money tomorrow, that problem's still going to exist. And so I think when you tie this to speech is when you get into trouble. And I just think if you get the speech out of the equation and really look at if we're concerned about keeping the sidewalks clear and people respecting other people's right to go up and down the street, that would be the better approach. Not focusing on what people are saying or any of that stuff. Because then I think you get into these strange situations where, we don't want to I don't want to regulate, stop kids from their cans and soccer teams and any of that stuff, for the United Way or the Salvation Army kettles. It just seems like we're really kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater here by going overboard. And it just seems like if we can look at some of the existing statutes and back it up a little bit and see if we can make this less speech oriented and more getting at the public policy goal. I mean, I'm not sure if we're too far in for that with this ordinance or what. I guess what I'd like to suggest.
You haven't passed it, so you're not too far into it.
Exactly. And I guess what I'm saying is we have another meeting in December, so.
Yeah, and this goes back then, I mean, before we move on to what the next steps were, which was what Councilor Reckman was trying to lead us towards, I'll ask then if there's other questions Councilor Murphy might have, or Councilor Reckman.
Questions, but I'll defer to Councilor Reckman if he's intending to lead us somewhere.
Well, it was my hope that the city solicitor and the police chief and Miss Anderson, perhaps with Mr. Newman's participation, might work on some revised language which could come to us at our next meeting.
I don't think that's possible in 2 weeks.
Our next committee meeting.
Okay, I'll
It is 2 weeks, I'm sorry.
Well, let me point out, we do have a regularly scheduled first Tuesday, which would be December 2nd.
Which is actually
next
1 week.
Yeah, and then Thanksgiving.
Yeah,
So
and based on our schedule of departments, we were to hear from the building department this month, and he deferred to next month. That would be, so Tony Patillo would work that out. We could
Well, be our first meeting in January. Then.
So that would be first meeting in January.
Certainly, I have no objection, since due to schedule conflicts, we moved this meeting well into the month, that I would agree that perhaps we continue discussion to our next meeting and then compare our schedules to see when we could do it. It would give the participants longer to do the necessary preparation and miss the holidays and so forth.
Okay, and we had a couple of questions, I think, about whether or not whether we would be able to do to have the meeting in such a way that it would accommodate open meeting law, and that may be what a former councilor Dwight is raising his hand
No, we just
about.
post them.
I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking.
Well, just a point of information, if the language is changed or modified, then does the public hearing reopen to address the concerns and issues relevant to that modified language?
I think we would, and I think it would be, if the committee agreed on it, we'd be possibly accepting it as a recommended changes. I'm not sure until I see them what they are, but yeah, we would definitely, anything new we would open a public hearing on. Can I just ask?
Yes.
We're kind of committing Attorney Newman to something which he has yet to speak about. I mean, because there's some language in your memo where you have some strong reservations that there can be any resolution to some of the concerns you have. Are you I mean, do you think that there's room for a meeting of the minds on this, or?
I don't know the answer to that. Let me, can I just have 1 minute to respond? I'll really be quick. First of all, I think there was a moment in this meeting that I just think we should pause on for a moment. And that was when one member of the public said, what would happen if we had a police officer downtown? And I think there should be more police downtown. And the chief applauded at that. I would just point out that all these claims, and I don't know how widespread they are, I really don't know. I mean, I work downtown. I've worked downtown for over 30 years. I've never been aggressively panhandled, but so be it. But if there was a police officer downtown, these fears, whatever they are, I think would be assuaged to an enormous degree, because people feel safe when there's a police officer on the street. And if you had another officer downtown, we wouldn't be having this meeting. That's just, at least most of it. So again, I have a question about enforcement, because if you can't enforce a very broad city ordinance that you have now, it says you can't block doorways, you can't block the sidewalk, and here we are, want to pass another law to say you can't block doorways and you can't block the sidewalk. Here we are. If you can't enforce what you have with the personnel you have, why is this going to make a big difference? I have questions about that. Second, Benefit talks about the constitutional right. Whether it is restricted, speech is restricted through a criminal statute or a civil statute, makes no difference, in my opinion. So if we're just going to have a disagreement about that, and we're just going to have a disagreement, I simply think that's wrong. This ordinance, I did give what I consider a silly example. But the silly example is not to be silly, it's to show how wrong the language is. Because in fact, the language says, it's not my opinion, it's the language. Solicitation shall mean any request for money for charitable or personal use, whether by word, unless otherwise permitted under a city ordinance or regulation. It's not my language. It is what the language does. Finally, that gets into an entire discussion, and I think that when you get into this question of, well, we wouldn't enforce that part of the statute, we just enforce some other part of the statute, that's exactly what the problem is, and that's exactly what's wrong with the ordinance. So if we can't solve those things, I don't know if we can have a meeting of the minds. If we can, I'd never say never.
Chief?
Okay.
Are you willing to?
We've been willing all along
Okay.
to come to a closer agreement on the language, and the recent 3 or 4 page thing we just received today.
Mhm.
So,
Computer problems.
Well, it sounds then like we may be looking at a recrafted ordinance for our next, at our first meeting in January, at which case we would consider then, if we know in advance that it's a recrafted ordinance, we would call for another, we would make sure that that's available on the city website, and that's good, and that folks have access to that to be able to provide further public input.
I think Terry was suggesting that your first meeting in February might be more realistic.
Okay.
Yes?
No,
No,
I was
you
thinking
think January?
I don't know.
I think
I'm just saying,
December was
what
too
I said
soon.
was December was not
Right,
possible. I don't
December
know
is a week
what's
from now.
realistic. Depends on how long it takes us to.
Meeting, so you could give us. I mean, you could maybe touch base with Attorney Newman between, or it just seems like you could give us a better sense after you've had a chance to read the memo and meet with him. We'd have a better sense of how long this might take.
I don't think we really care whether it's the first meeting in January
Okay.
or February.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I still want to promise it for the first meeting in January.
I think we just need to be prepared to let the public know and do that through
That's not a
the context of the regular city council meeting and the website
Press.
and the press, and we'll make sure that folks know that if there is an amended or a redrafted ordinance, that folks have access to that and can see it and then be able to come and make public comment at a future meeting.
All right, so just to be clear, this will not be a topic on our agenda meeting for December, which is next week, because it's too soon, but it will be at our meeting in January. And if there's changes to the ordinance that would require it to have another public hearing as a result of the changes, that it will be at our January meeting, and that we will also post that as a council meeting, so other councilors, if they wish to come, will be covered.
Yes, but I just want to ask the other councilors, because I'm not sure about this. We know that this was referred first to public safety, then to LU, and then to ordinance. So I'm wondering, is this going to stop? Will this
Stay here.
automatically- Will this
It'll stay here till we pass it on, I believe.
Okay, so is that how folks understand it? Will not look at LU?
Hierarchy of, I thought it was referred to all three
Just-
committees, and
it
that
is,
ordinance
yeah, but
committee
ordinance will
won't take
do
it up
that.
until the other committees.
Ordinance
What I'm
doesn't last.
asking is,
But EDLU might discuss it.
Yeah.
okay,
Be
so,
fine.
Yeah.
Say again?
Which would be fine.
Yeah, okay.
We just didn't want to be having repetitious public
okay, so
hearings.
what I'm asking then is, for the public to know, is it more likely that this ordinance will appear at EDLU before it comes back to us? Because we do have an EDLU meeting in the second week of December. Is it more likely, Terry, in your mind, since you'll be at EDLU, that we'll be taking this redrafted ordinance? We'd have to make sure folks.
I doubt a redrafted ordinance will go to EDLU, but, they will probably be reported in on this public hearing and the discussions and where we're at, and to get their feedback also as a committee on their thoughts on the on
so
this
their-
latest version.
Their
of it.
concerns could be put in the draft as well.
Yes.
So the only way it will come up in our December meeting is just to get a report from Terry about whether she thinks January or February is the most likely time to get revised.
And the reason I'm asking this again is for the public's
Right.
sake. And so the public should know that this is going to go to EDLU next. Before it comes back to us, this proposed ordinance will be at the December 8th meeting. It would be very likely at the December 8th meeting of EDLU, which is a week and a half, which is 2 weeks from today. So you can expect that, you know, you don't,
It won't be a public hearing.
Right.
They don't do public hearings.
Yeah.
They'll have an internal conversation about it.
Yeah, this will be
Unless
the
they
better
decide to-
venue for the
If
public
they decide to have a
weigh in.
public hearing, they would post it. There's not enough time to have that discussion and then post it for then.
But people should know that this is a public meeting. EDLU will be taking this up for internal dialogue and conversation on December 8th at the hearing room on the second floor of City Hall
1 p.m.
at 1 p.m. on December 8th.
And can I just clarify something? Because I don't want to give the impression that this ordinance is going to be rewritten and then brought back in a different form. Because I think what this ordinance is the ordinance that's before the city council. And this ordinance has to go back to city council, but it could go back with recommendations of changes. It could go back with, you know, we don't have the ability to amend it directly here, but we can recommend, we can say we recommend with these changes, or we don't recommend with these changes. But so I guess I just don't want to give people the impression that you're going to go back, redraft the whole thing, because if that's the case, then you'd have to go back to the start of the process again, which is we've done once before. So that's, I just want to be clear that that's not what we're asking you to do.
Well, I think it depends on how drastic it changes. I mean,
Well,
if
if it
there's
becomes-
significant changes, then my guess is that we would start over.
Okay.
I think that would be the better way to do it, because then it gets too crazy if you're going to make wholesale changes by amendment.
And at that point, we'd have to be sure that we have it posted that there would be, we reopen the public hearing.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Brand new public hearing.
Yeah, it would be a brand new one if in fact it was referred back to.
Now, again, the public hearing was posted for the public safety meeting, but other committees may decide, such as ordinance.
Mhm.
So it looks as though this is at least will be a considerable amount of time before we come to any resolution on this.
And I think we really should thank all the members of the public who came here tonight and gave us their good ideas and observations about the proposed ordinance.
I also want to thank Chief Sienkiewicz and Attorney Sheppard, Teri Anderson, and Attorney Newman for all the time that you spent meeting with us and filling us in, and especially all the time you spent in working on this. Okay. Then I'll ask if there's any other business for the public safety meeting tonight.
I move we adjourn.
I heard a motion.
Second.
Moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Adjourn.